Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 239, Tuivasa versus Tybura, also known as UFC Vegas 88. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me this week, stepping in for Keith Schillen, is Mr. Devin Tejada, host of the Check the Kick podcast on Sherdog.com. He's pointing at the wrong side. There you go. Dev, thanks for joining me, and how are you doing today?
I am doing pretty well. No episode of Check the Kick this week, filling in for Keith, but I'm very happy to do so. I feel like it's been a little bit of time. It's been a while since you and I have done anything together.
It has been a while. Keith has just been a little too reliable. But yeah, for all the Check the Kick fans out there who will be jonesing for their 45 to 60 minutes of Dev, I got something special for you because we're probably going to be here for a little over 2 hours. Obviously, you and I are both still cooling off from the sizzle of UFC 299. I know that you rattled windows in your house screaming when Dustin Poirier pulled off the come from behind win that maybe shouldn't have had to be a come from behind win, but nonetheless, we love the man. We stepped down from that sensational card. I mean, one that certainly will be in a discussion for card of the year based on what it delivered on paper, what it delivered in the cage, to, well, UFC Vegas 88. It's a card. It's 13 fights. Give me your general thoughts on this one. Give it a letter grade based on what it presents on paper.
C.
I don't hate that. I might even go a little lower. And I'm not disagreeing. I mean, obviously, this is just a matter of opinion, but things I look at when I'm judging a fight night card, because obviously we're looking for different things from a free cable card versus something they're asking you, to shell out 70 or 80 bucks for. But I want some amount of divisional relevance. So I'm going to ask myself, who on this entire card is closest to a title shot off of a win? And looking here, even with heavyweights in the headliner, there's no one within 3 fights of a title shot here. Like, Tuivasa is on a 3-fight losing streak. Tybura's been alternating wins and losses basically the entire time he's been in the UFC. So neither of those guys is close. And then you just go down the list. Bryan Battle's a decent prospect, but at 170, he might literally be 8 wins in a row away from the title picture. It's wild. Assuming that there is no women's featherweight division going forward, because otherwise, the Kianzad Chiasson winner is arguably, right there. There's nobody on this card within 3 fights of a title shot. And that's fine. But the other thing it needs to deliver is, okay, give me some exciting prospects, some people that maybe will be populating my pay-per-view main cards 2 years from now. Give me some well-known action fighters. Give me some bangers. This has got a little of that. The undercard has some interesting prospects. Jafel Filho has over-delivered on expectations. Pompos Grigoriou in the curtain jerker is going to be a man to watch. It's going to be a whole hell of a lot of fun for as long as it lasts. It's got a little of that. I don't see a whole lot in the way of just guaranteed barn burners. Like, I'm thinking C- maybe. It's not one of the hottest cards of the year, even by fight night standards on paper. And yeah, man, fights is better than no fights, but yeah, this one could be rough.
There's a couple dudes on here that I like and care about, like Mike Davis. If he can actually just become a regular MMA fighter, he's always fun to watch. And then his twin brother, Isaac Dulgarian, is also a very, very highly touted prospect.
All right. At the very least, Dulgarian is like his mini me. He's like the so shrink ray. No, they look exactly the same, but if you put them next to each other, Dulgarian is like the shrink ray version. Yeah.
It's his little brother, It just looks, it could totally be. Ask your dad where he was traveling, but this is one of those cards where
Dev calling people's parentage into question. Wow.
This is right. He's in the military. This is one of those cards, especially reeling off of UFC 299, where like if you are, if you are a recreational person that does stuff and there's some good weather coming this weekend, like maybe you choose to go out on the boat. Maybe you choose to go do some fishing. Maybe you go, take the family to the park on Saturday. instead of making sure you're glued to the seat like you would have done for UFC 299.
I think that's a fair assessment. Having said that, the good, the bad, and the ugly, we're here to preview them all. Any other general thoughts on this card before we dive into the prelims?
We're talking all this stuff, and it's probably going to be like we might get like one of those 14 finishes in a row or something like that. And
absolutely, it's why you watch the fights.
Yep.
I'd be watching this even if it wasn't my job, but ultimately, what gives it that little extra spice, especially in advance, is knowing that okay, fight A might be a title eliminator. Fight B, this 11-0 kid is killing everybody. Let's see if he can take the next step. There's not as much of that, but having said that, we're going to be here for it.
Yeah, totally.
First up at UFC Vegas 88 is a men's bantamweight clash between the debuting Charalampos Grigoriou and Chad Anheliger. Grigoriou, the 31-year-old Cypriot by way of Long Island, is 8-3 overall. He fought most recently on Dana White's Contender Series last August, where he took just a minute to put out Cameron Smotherman. That punched his ticket to the big octagon, where he makes his debut now against Anheliger. He had been scheduled to fight Toshiomi Kazama. Kazama fell off the card a while back, so in steps Anheliger. 37-year-old Canadian is 12-7 overall. He's 1-2 since joining the UFC out of season 5 of Dana White's Contender Series. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. Going back about a year and a half, dropped a unanimous decision to Alateng Lee back in September of 2022, got choked out in the third round by Jose Johnson last November at UFC Fight Night Allen versus Craig. So he'll be looking to turn that around. He is not favored to do so, as Grigoriou is a moderate favorite in its debut. He's minus 170 and Anheliger plus 140. I'll start with the bad news about Pampos Grigoriou. The bad news is that he is 31 and he turns 32 in a couple of weeks. At bantamweight, I mean, this is a division where you could take the best bantamweight in the world, and if he's 33 years old and he gets knocked out, we're going to start asking, is he shot? Is he on his way down? This is a division that is not kind to the elderly. So Grigoriou making his debut just shy of his 32nd birthday is not ideal. The good news is, thus far, he's looking prime. He's always been an interesting prospect. He's crossed over into being kind of a scary one. He's a striker. He's from Cyprus, but he's lived in New York and he's trained. I mean, I think he's been at Longo and Weidman MMA long enough that he was there when it was Sarah Longo, and he went with Longo and Weidman when the split happened. But he's a striker. Orthodox, big power, hard kicks. He likes spinning stuff. Specifically, he likes to start with something spinning right off the bat. Like half of his fights, he'll just start with a spin kick. And he's caught a few people with it. Not specifically necessarily caught him with the spin kick, but he has a couple of sub 30-second knockouts where clearly just coming at a guy with something spinning, put him on their heels, and he caught him with punches a few seconds later. I'm not saying that's going to work against UFC level bantamweights, but nonetheless, he's a powerful, dynamic striker. He has a tendency to kind of go for offense at the expense of defense. Like he will go for the kill, kind of coming in with his hands down in a way that it'll cost him if he makes his way anywhere up the rankings. But thus far, it hasn't really cost him. He comes into this fight on a decent win streak, and on the Contender Series, he destroyed Cameron Smotherman, who he's a guy from down here in Houston. I followed him for a while. I think Smotherman is a good prospect, and I still think he'll be in the UFC within the next couple of years. But he did to Smotherman what Smotherman normally does to people. Caught him with something early, and then just hit him with 15 follow-up shots before he could do anything to recover. Yeah, he's going to be a whole hell of a lot of fun for as long as he sticks around in the UFC, even if time is not on the side. But on the topic of time is not on the side, Chad Anheliger is 37 years old, and he's still pretty competitive. You look at Anheliger, his record is deceptive. You see 12-7, but he lost 5 of his first 6 fights, all by submission, and then went on a pretty decent tear, and that really only came to an end in his last couple fights. He is a guy who has aged relatively gracefully because his game never really ran on explosive athleticism anyway, at least to the extent that is possible at men's bantamweight. He's always been Well, he's always been a tough, grimy, grindy guy who has done his best when he can outlast his opponents and make his opponents work too hard. Like, left to his own devices, he'd slug things out on the feet, sprawl and brawl. And he's at his best when fighters try to take him down and they either can't take him down or they have to spend too much gas doing so. They wear out and he starts rolling downhill on them. He's very much a bantamweight version of what people like Darren Elkins bring. I mean, Darren Elkins is more of the offensive wrestler, but just talking about the not terribly athletic, but extremely tough guy who grinds out his opponents. He has yet to be stopped by strikes. His vulnerabilities are definitely on the ground. So that'll be interesting considering that Grigoriou is a floor is lava type guy. The concerning thing about Anheliger is against Jose Johnson, he did start to look a little old to me for the first time. For the first time that I could remember, he wasn't really the fresher guy in the third round. You got the rare example. I mean, the thing I remember most about his fight with Jose Johnson was him being on top and getting his ass kicked with strikes from the bottom. Like, anytime I see a fighter on the bottom in guard trying to, throw elbows and punches from the bottom instead of just trying to get out of there, I roll my eyes. But it was working for Jose Johnson. He was busting Anheliger up, ended up hurting him, sweeping him, and then tapping him out. Again, I mentioned that not as an obvious avenue to victory that Grigoriou could follow, but just as an example that maybe Anheliger is losing a step. Because that is a position where he would have been very comfortable just a couple of years ago. Oh, I'm on top early in the third round. Yeah, I'm gonna park on top of this guy, chip away, and win this round and probably steal the fight. That wasn't the case. Here, Grigoriou's gonna come right at him. He's probably gonna throw a spin kick first. He's gonna bounce in and out of range. He's gonna be way faster than Anheliger. I have the feeling he's gonna catch him and he's gonna hurt him early. Anheliger is still hard to hurt on the feet, even if he's easy to hit. So I'm not saying he's just going to get flatlined in 60 seconds like a lot of Grigoriou's opponents have, but I'm thinking Grigoriou hurts him in the first round, probably takes that round, and then from there we kind of see where this goes. I'm leaning towards Grigoriou to win a decision here, maybe by winning the first two rounds and having to hold on in the third. Grigoriou has shown that he can function in a 3 or even 5 round fight, as long as he's taking on an overmatched opponent where, he's definitely dictating the pace. That may not be the case with Anheliger, but I'm slightly high on him as a prospect. So I'm going to say he has enough to get past him. Anheliger at this point is kind of the gatekeeper to, okay, if you can beat me, you definitely at least belong here. I say Grigoriou passes that test and gets himself a nice little win bonus for his 32nd birthday. Grigoriou by decision.
I am very torn on this one because Anheliger's game is just kind of like never die. Like you said, never die and always be around. But the Jose Johnson fight, like, I hate to come on the show and so early say this, but like Jose Johnson kind of stinks. Like he's just not.
No way.
Like he's just not that, especially like when it comes to any sort of grappling at all. Like we've seen him get absolutely mushed there. So for him to, have that success late in a fight, that fight was also a brawl. Like that was a real good fight. And Jose Johnson was definitely significantly larger than Anheliger. Like Anheliger's just not a big dude. And maybe that's why he's been able to just be 37 and stay at bantamweight for so long, because he's not, killing himself to make 135. Like he could probably kill himself to make $125. But he's 37. Grigoriou's.
I mean, his primary sparring partner is Hakeem Dawodu. Can you imagine the difference in size and speed between those two guys?
Significant.
Yeah.
It just imagine your sparring partner is always 40 pounds heavier than you at a minimum.
Oh.
That would,
Yeah.
And when Dawodu wants to be mean, probably kick Anheliger's ass a couple times in the gym there. Grigoriou, his game, like Smotherman's a good win. He's a guy from your neck of the woods, like main training partners with Adrian Yanez. I know you know those dudes super well. And he's a pretty highly touted prospect. I watched him. I mean, he got immediately iced, and it was almost so instant where it's on the level of like, you don't want to call things in MMA a fluke, especially at this level. But like that was I don't know if that gets repeated, again. I don't think if they get matched up 10 times, that happens again. And that's just one of those things, but that's Grigoriou's game, is like do crazy shit, full velocity, big power. He's a big dude at this division. It's one of those, like, we know who's going to win the first round and a half of this fight, and then we don't know who's going to win the last round and a half of this fight. What are the odds on this again? Like, how big of a
Grigoriou's minus 170 and Anheliger plus 140. So not a 2-1 favorite, just kind of a, moderate kind of 3-2 type thing.
It's crazy. We talk about dudes being old at bantamweight, and everybody up until about 48 hours ago was calling Petrion old and potentially washed up, and he's 31 and he was the champion. So this division is probably the best division in MMA in general over all organizations at 135 pounds. But Anheliger, it's just hard to pick him in a fight like this because he kind of looked really bad, and he's 37 and he doesn't fight very often. Like, he's fighting once every 8 months or so, once a year type dude. Give me Grigoriou to hurt him in the first round and just do enough damage through the first two. Like, Anheliger could pull this off. He could win the last 2 rounds of this fight. But, like, the dude's 37. It's bantamweight. Just, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes it it's an ugly ass fight for the last 10 minutes and he wins a decision that people are throwing their arms up about. That's Anheliger's game. But yeah, I'm Grigoriou. I'm kind of thinking it's going to go the same way you are.
Next up on the UFC Fight Night 239 undercard is a strawweight matchup between Jackie Amorim and Cory McKenna. Amorim, the 28-year-old Brazilian, is 7-1 overall. She is 1-1 since joining the UFC as the outgoing LFA strawweight champ. She lost her debut to Sam Hughes last April, came back in August, and put in arguably the beatdown of the year on Montserrat Conejo on the way to a third round ground and pound stoppage. She'll look to build on that momentum against the returning McKenna. 24-year-old Welsh woman by way of Sacramento is 8-2 overall. She's 3-1 since joining the UFC out of season 4 of Dana White's Contender Series. Fought most recently all the way back in December of 2022. So has been on the shelf for about 15 months. But last time we saw her, she was taking a 3-round decision off of Cheyenne Vlismas. She steps into the cage here as just the slightest of favorites. McKenna is minus 125. Amorim available at even money plus 100. These are two young strawweights. Amorim is 28. McKenna is 24. So there's plenty of potential for them to develop. They're both at very good teams. But what I see so far in these two is women who function best when they can be the bully, but they're not going to have very many chances to do so in the UFC strawweight division. They're just, neither of them is very big. And at least at this stage in their physical and professional development, neither of them is like, they're both short, and they're not like Jessica Andrade short where they got muscle on top of muscle. They're just kind of smallish strawweights. And Amorim, it's a perfect example because she really was a bully on the LFA level, but then she ran into Sam Hughes and she looked great for the first round. It looked like the LFA version of Amorim. She was all over her, took her down, was doing work on the ground, but Hughes just being a little bigger, a little better than the women she was used to fighting. She clearly wore herself out doing that work. She came out tired for the second round and dropped the last 2 rounds in pretty straightforward fashion, just as Hughes started to roll downhill on her. And while Hughes is a decent middle of the road strawweight, like she's not, like she's not, she's not Tatiana Suarez either. Once you got Amorim back in against Montserrat Conejo, which is maybe even a smaller version of the same thing, she absolutely wrecked her. She, 2 10-8 rounds, just
she's the worst. She's the worst 115er on the roster, though.
Well, if she even still is on the roster, but no question.
They both have wins over like the worst strawweight on the roster because McKenna has a win over Miranda Granger.
Yep. So Amorim, she's a good grappler who she can. I feel like I say this about a lot of women fighters, and it's just because there's not the same structure for amateur wrestling for women in most of the world as there is for men, although that's gradually getting better. But I will say that they're a good grappler that sometimes struggles to get the fight to the ground on their terms. And I say that about people all the way up to the level of like Mackenzie Dern. Amorim is one of those. Like, if she physically outmatches the other woman to the point that she could just run up, body lock, and kind of throw her to the ground, she thrives, because she really is a good top position grappler, nice ground and pound, like solid back takes. She's just like a good ground fighter. Against Sam Hughes, again, she wore herself out getting the fight to those kind of positions. Against Montserrat Ruiz, she had no problem at all doing it and thrashed her. Assuming that's the kind of fight she tries to bring to McKenna, it's going to be interesting, because while McKenna comes out like a boxer and like definitely like you can tell that there's boxing in her background, if Amorim tries to throw her on the ground, I think McKenna's going to go, well, don't threaten me with a good time, because I think actually McKenna's best skills are on the ground. I can't believe she's just 24. I mean, she's been gone for over a year. She is so young.
She was the youngest on the roster, I think, at one point. Off the
I think she was at least the youngest woman on the roster for a minute. And the wild thing is, she looks even younger than she is. I mean, she has to be the most baby-faced fighter in UFC history.
She's married.
She looks 14. She can't be married.
Like, she's she's like, and I'm pretty sure she got married during this time off. I know she was nursing some injuries and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the reason of this extended layoff? Just like life shit? I know she does a lot of like commentary on, you know, lower level stuff. She does stuff with Uriah Faber. Does she need money? That's always a question, you know?
And at 24, it may just be, hey, I got married. I don't believe she had a kid. I know she's been doing work with like Uriah Faber's promotion out there. You know, she's a long time, well, I can't say long time about someone who's 24, but you know, she's been a Team Alpha Male for a while. But there's every possibility that she's still taking her career very seriously, and she's back here.
She's so young too. You're totally
see what
right.
She can do.
She's fucking 24.
But you know, in effect, in the cage, you know, she's a boxer with. She throws decent volume, not a whole lot of pop, but again, you know, she was 22 the last time we saw her. She's only going to grow in power for the, you know, foreseeable future. She can kick, though doesn't choose to very often, and she's one of those ones that even though she clearly fancies herself a striker, when shit pops off, you can tell she almost wants it to go to the ground. And the first fighter I really said this about was Norma Dumont, where, you know, she was like, I'm a Sandah practitioner. I won these medals in Sandah. And she stands like a karate fighter. But I watched her fights and I was like, okay, but as soon as somebody hits her, she grabs a clinch and tries to throw him on the ground. Like, that's clearly her safe place when things get hectic. I feel a little bit of the same way about McKenna. And that's what's interesting about this matchup to me is Amorim is probably going to wade in with punches. She likes to punch her way into clinch range. I think she probably hits harder than McKenna on a shot-for-shot basis, but McKenna's a more polished boxer. But again, if Amorim, you know, walks in, either, you know, grabs a single leg or just forces her to the cage and tries to get a takedown against the cage, I'm interested to see what happens when it goes to the ground, because, you know, McKenna's proven surprisingly nimble on the ground. Like, she's good in transition, not terribly heavy on top, but, you know, like pretty opportunistic. She's been good at avoiding danger and putting her opponents in danger when they're on the ground. Even though Amorim is the slight underdog here, I am leaning towards her as maybe a little more of a finished product, a little more physically mature. I think she's physically stronger than McKenna right now. So in a battle of two fighters that do best when they're the bully, I think Amorim is the one that's more likely to be able to do that. McKenna is a little bit of a unknown quantity right now. She has been gone for over a year. In the case of somebody that's only been a pro for, you know, like 5 years or so, that's a huge chunk of time to be out. And if Keith were here, he'd point out that with a fighter this young, sometimes they make massive improvements over that time, or other times it's just been a time that they've been focusing on other stuff and they've made no improvement at all. I don't know. So I'm having to base this on a guess, but even if McKenna has been diligent, I'm just leaning Amorim slightly. Give me Jackie Amorim to win this one by decision. Just getting slightly the better of whatever exchanges there are on the ground. And when they're swinging free on the feet, she may not land the same volume, but she'll land the shots that are a little bit more telling. And McKenna also is blessed with that Welsh complexion where like one glancing jab and she looks like she's been hit by a truck. That never helps with the judges either. So give me Amorim by decision here.
It's funny that I'm just like the exact opposite on this fight. Disagreement
is what fuels the entertainment value. Good.
And like watching Amorim, she is the ultimate front runner. Like all of her wins are like first round, first minute. She's got one that's like within, like 4 minutes and 30 something seconds. But the Montserrat Ruiz fight, like I watched that back today and like, I mean, she should have finished that fight like 30 times. There's absolutely no reason why that fight lasted as long as it did. And Montserrat, I think she's like 4'11". I know they measure her in at 5 feet, but she's like that. I mean, Amorim was like 5'4", I think, or something like that, 5'5", and like they were like a foot.
Yep.
Watching the tape, it was like, it's like if I, fought a middle schooler, like that was the size difference. It was incredible. And Sam Hughes, I think Sam Hughes, my gosh, looking at the Sam Hughes fight with Amorim, it was just, if McKenna can, I don't know why McKenna just can't have the same exact fight as Sam Hughes. I think possesses a lot of the same physical attributes when it comes to like durability, cardio, toughness. I think Cory McKenna is actually super tough. We've seen her, have some kind of, I'm going to call it a blood and guts fight. It is women's, strawweight, but she's been in some fights. We've seen her nose busted up. We've seen her face adversity. And another thing too, is she fought somebody that has like the exact same game as Amorim, but I think even more, deadly with her submissions than Vanessa Demopoulos. And I think Vanessa Demopoulos is a lot more physical, but Demopoulos was also an LFA champ and she won the belt, kind of doing the same things that Amorim did. And I think McKenna, even though she's been out for so long, she's fought better people. I mean, she sent Kay Hansen to OnlyFans. Well, I think Kay Hansen lost like 2 more times after that. But yeah, she did. Jasmine Jasdavicius, I remember, kind of beat her up. Anyway, yeah, I just think Cory McKenna can avoid a first round hailstorm from Amorim and then just kind of stick her with a jab. You look at, I'm also accounting for, look what Alpha Male's done with Song Yadong, another super young prospect. Alpha Male does really good with young prospects. I know she has a good relationship with Uriah Faber. I think that I'm hoping that she's not just fighting for money to pay off her wedding. I hope it's not like one of those types of things where I have a very good, I have a cush job. I'm making enough money to survive and I'm fighting to pay some stuff off because I haven't fought in a while. I really hope that's not the reason. I really hope she's taking her career seriously. And I think if she is, at her age, she can make improvements. She's at the right camp. I think Cory McKenna wins a decision. And Jaqueline Amorim's she's either finished or lost via decision.
Yep. We head now to the featherweight division for a clash between Josh Culibao and the debuting Danny Silva. Culibao, the 29-year-old Australian, is 11-2-1 overall. He's 3-2-1 in the UFC. He's 3-1-1 at featherweight. He made his debut back in 2020 against Jalen Turner at lightweight, which, I mean, that's lightweight and then lightweight plus. But since dropping down to his natural weight class of 145, he is 3-1-1. He lost his last time out. It was a unanimous decision at the hands of Laron Murphy at UFC London last July. Prior to that, he'd been on a 3-fight win streak. He'll look to start a new one here at the expense of the debuting Silva. Silva, 27-year-old from Orange County, is 8-1 overall. He fought on the Contender Series last September, beating Angel Pacheco by unanimous decision. He's on a 2-fight win streak overall, and he steps in here as the slight underdog. Culibao is -160, Silva +130 on the comeback. Dev, I mean, give me your general thoughts on this fight. If I feel like Culibao is a little more of a known quantity, but if you see any decent upside in Silva and how you see this fight going.
Before I break this down, I'm kind of looking at this whole card as you were speaking there. How many fighters on this card have either came off of the Ultimate Fighter or off the Contender Series? Do you know that stat? Because I'm looking out all these, like a lot of these people have come in from the UFC's let's say feeder organizations.
Give
It's
me
a
a second.
lot. It's a shit ton. Like, I guess this is what we get with the Contender Series now. Bryan Battle, Ultimate Fighter, Anjousa Contender Series.
Well over half of them. There's 26 fighters on this card. About 15 are from Dana White's Contender Series alone. We have 2 tough winners on this card. We have Bryan Battle and Macy Chiasson. So yeah,
it's crazy. I'm just emailing Natan Levy, Mike Davis, Christian Rodriguez, all these.
It's not crazy. It's Dana White Saturday Night Contender Series. These are the cards they stick you on until you win 3 or 4 fights in a row and you get promoted to either deluxe fight nights on the road or pay-per-view undercards. But yeah, this is a perfect example of Dana White Saturday Night Contender Series.
We are watching this happen before our eyes.
It's been happening for about 3 years. Like first 2 seasons of Dana White's Contender Series, you like even if you won by first round knockout, you weren't necessarily signed. You know, Chris Curtis knocked somebody out on the first season of Dana White's Contender Series in the first round, but he happened to be on the same episode as like I think Alonzo Menafield and what's his name? Hardy.
And look where they are now.
Yeah. So and now, I mean, even some of the losers get signed. So they got to put them someplace because a lot of those fighters by definition are not long for the UFC. So they stick them on these cards and that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, there's good fighters on this card. So that they're doing their job. You know, it's a lot. It's a high volume. You know, if you eat 100 cheeseburgers, cheeseburgers are good. The first 3 or 4. But yeah, Danny Silva, he's a guy that's kind of he's come off the LFA. He's fought on the LFA. Got a win via decision on the Contender Series last year, and it was in a fight where, like, if it was on the first season or the second season, he might not even be in the UFC right now. Culibao is just an action dude. He's a dude that's even still. We talked about him fighting Jalen Turner at 55. Like, he is a dude that he's one of those guys. You know, you could tell he probably used to be fat before he got into MMA.
Yeah,
where he's still a dude that like could put on probably 15 pounds of muscle and still stay in this division. He's not the biggest guy, but he's got big power. He is a dude that, you know, he likes to crack. He will brawl, draw against, you know, and his first 2 fights, the dude had to fight Jalen Turner and Charles Jourdain. They're like, oh, you just got knocked out by Jalen Turner here. And then he fought Charles Jourdain to a split decision.
Yep.
That's a great win, you know. The submission over Meerschaert Baghdasaryan was a good win to me. I think Baghdasaryan, it can be a very dangerous kickboxer that comes from a terrible camp. Sungwoo Choi, you know how we feel about him here. Still beat that guy. Nordin Beke, that's a pretty good win in my opinion. Even though he lost to Lerone Murphy last time out, Lerone Murphy's good.
Murphy's undefeated. Yeah, like, nobody's beaten Murphy.
People have fought him to a draw, but no one's beat him. And Lerone Murphy would probably be in the top 7 of the division if he could just actually fight fights. So I'm not taking that away from him. And he was much bigger than him in that fight. Culibao is going to probably try to make this a brawl against Danny Silva. And I don't think Silva has the ability to just kind of hang in the pocket and fight this fight at boxing range. But if he tries to wrestle and grapple with Culibao is a dude that has a sneaky submission game, you know, like the Meerschaert Baghdasaryan fight. He is a dude that will, you know, sink something in a weird, chaotic moment. And I just see him probably hurting Danny Silva at some point in this fight. I think this is, even though Culibao is not ranked and he's probably in the top 25 of this division, you know, but he's just like a dangerous dude. He's one of those guys that's unassumingly dangerous. And I just think this is a bad fight for anyone that's debuting in the UFC unless you're someone that's like a Lerone Murphy or, someone that is a very, very highly touted dude. And Danny Silva is just kind of a guy that want to fight in the Contender Series.
Yeah. So what's the call?
Culibao, club and sub. I think he probably finishes him in the first round, probably hurts him, and has Silva shooting for the legs and hits him with the Darcer and Anaconda.
Yeah, I underestimated Josh Culibao pretty badly on the tail end of his debut against. Well, yeah, it's easy to underestimate him because he doesn't cut an imposing figure, and he got slaughtered by Jalen Turner in his debut. And I found myself thinking, and I believe he's one of the rash of fighters that got signed for a couple of Australian cards that year. So, that brought in some great fighters.
Sure.
And then it also brought in some that were not good. And I remember thinking, man, Culibao is one of the worst fighters the UFC has ever signed. He, if the UFC hadn't been going to Australia that month, he never would have gotten within a million miles of the UFC. But I remember thinking the same thing about Justin Tafa that same year, and he's turned into a halfway decent fighter as well. So shows what I know. But even after I started to kind of change my thoughts on Culibao, I continued to underestimate him. I agree that the Meerschaert Baghdasaryan win was a good one, and I picked that wrong. I believe I picked Baghdasaryan to blow Culibao out of his sneakers in the first round, and he did his best to do so. But Culibao, crafty, tough, survived, took advantage of Baghdasaryan's, subpar ground game. He trains with a bunch of renowned judo experts. Why would he be any good on the ground? Anyway, Culibao is going to have a hard ceiling on where he can go in this division, just based on being undersized, not very athletic. But yeah, he's tough. He's decent everywhere, and he keeps on snatching wins over pretty good fighters. Like, I agree with you. Shayilan is a decent fighter. He's something like 6-3 in the UFC right now in one of the toughest divisions. That's not bad. And one of the losses is to Josh Culibao. I like Sungwoo Choi. And then even like not counting Turner, which was unfair, Charles Jourdain and Lerone Murphy are both very good fighters, and he made fights with them very competitive, or more competitive than you would have thought they'd be. So I continue to underestimate Culibao, and I know I must be doing it right now because I keep wanting to talk myself into the upset value here on Silva. He has some things at a first glance that are tantalizing in a prospect. He's just 27. You like that. He's going to be big, tall, rangy for the division. Like, to me, like physically, his silhouette just kind of like, if you just backlit him, he looks about like what it looked like on those occasions when Edson Barboza dropped to 145. Like long arms, long legs, just not an ounce of fat on him. And he does his best kind of, poor man's Edson Barboza. He's a kickboxer who, he would prefer to strike at distance where he can either nail people with kicks or, just be close to the end of punching range, but surprisingly effective inside as well. He has some good short, tight punches. He's good at hitting people with elbows when they come inside or, off of breaks in the clinch. Like, I wasn't blown away by his performance on the Contender Series, but I thought, here's a guy that if he gets a shot could maybe stick around for a while. But I'm done underestimating Culibao. I could see Silva hurting Culibao bad in the first round like he did Pacheco. But the thing is, Silva, I think, dropped Pacheco in the first half of the first round, and Pacheco never really got back in the fight. Silva was just on him from there on out. I could see him hurting Culibao, and Culibao is still there in his face, and Silva might not be able to take that. So I've got Culibao by decision here. I think he maybe weathers an early storm and then does what is quickly becoming the Josh Culibao thing and hangs on, pulls ahead late, wins the last 2 rounds. So give me Culibao by decision. Flyweights take the cage next as Jafel Filho and Ode Osbourne square off. Filho, the 30-year-old Brazilian, is 15-3 overall. He's 1-1 since joining the UFC out of season 6 of Dana White's Contender Series. He won his last time out, choked out Daniel Barras in the first round at UFC London last July. he will look to stretch that into a winning streak against Osbourne. 30-year-old Jamaican American fighting out of Milwaukee is 12-6 with 1 no contest overall. He's 4-4 in the UFC. Worth noting that he's 1-2 at flyweight. He's fought at 135 as well as 125 pounds. He is 1-2 at flyweights. Lost most recently last August at UFC on ESPN, Sandhagen versus Font, where he fought rising prospect Asu Almabayev at flyweight and got choked out in the second round. So he's looking to turn things around. He is not favored to do so. Filho is a -180 favorite. Osbourne +150 as the underdog. I'm just about off the Ode Osbourne Express. I mean, I was never like, up front tooting the horn anyway, but he's a guy that he was a win one, lose one at bantamweight. And I thought, well, he's a big bantamweight. If he can really drop to 125 and look, any kind of decent physically, maybe he could make some noise there. That hasn't really panned out either. And while losing to Asu Almabayev, there's no shame there. Like, Almabayev looks like he might have top 10 upside.
Sure.
He also got lamped by Tyson Nam, which again, yeah, Nam hits hard, especially for a flyweight, but that was the 39-year-old Tyson Nam. Like, just Ode Osbourne is what he is. Seems like he's a consistently entertaining fighter across 2 weight classes who I guess you could almost think of him as a flyweight, bantamweight Julian Erosa, where he has all the tools offensively. Like, he's a good striker, he's a good grappler, but just porous defense and a reckless approach mean that he's just out to make somebody's highlight reel, whether it's his or his opponent's. He's an equal opportunity distributor of highlights. I think that spells danger against Filho, who looks like a man of interest. Like, obviously he won his last time out, choked out Daniel Barris, made it look easy, got that Nova União just topside squeeze, but his loss in his debut is almost more noteworthy because maybe it should have been a win. That was the controversial one where he took on Muhammad Mokaev, the undefeated super prospect, like the guy that was going to be the superstar cross between Khabib and Conor, and
might be the next title challenger at flyweight.
Might be the next title challenger. And like, even if you don't think Mokaev really tapped in the second round, that Filho had him in that much trouble is, moral victories they only count so far, but that means something. Like, he had the proclaimed future of the division in a whole lot of peril. He ended up losing that fight. I mean, it had to be deflating when he didn't get the win.
Ripped the dude's knee off and nothing.
Yeah. I mean, just for those who didn't watch it or don't remember, he had Mokaev in a knee bar in the second round that you could see stuff popping.
The knee was hyperextended, like this, like backward, like the same way Anderson Silva's leg. Not to that extent, but I mean, full on knee bar, as deep as you could get one, rip Mokaev's knees to shreds, or knee to shreds, and dude didn't tap.
No. So I mean, Filho, he's almost like an old school Nova União guy, because it wasn't really until Jose Aldo came along that we thought, oh, Nova União has these killer knockout artists. It was Jose Aldo and about a year worth of Marlon Sandro deciding to become the Incredible Hulk. But before that, Nova União was a camp full of little guys. It was like the Brazilian team alpha male, outstanding jiu-jitsu practitioners, a lot of topside specialists, and kind of lousy strikers. Filho is a little bit of a hark back to that. He's not a lousy striker. He has good natural power. He has, decent fundamental boxing, but he's a very, very good grappler, as witnessed when he took on Mokaev. He's still just 30 years old. He has a little time to work. 125 pounds is all of a sudden kind of wide open because you've got a champ that's been around so long that he's fought everybody. It's hard to think of a champ starting his first title reign, having already faced the rest of the contenders in his division to the extent that Alexandre Pantoja has. So Filho, all he'd have to do is win. Like, if say he wins 3 fights this year, wins 4 fights this year, he might be on the doorstep of a title shot. Osbourne is going to be a great guy for him to probably kind of make a statement against. That's what I see here. Like, Osbourne is dangerous, but Osbourne's best route to victory is nailing Filho with a kill shot from outside, like just a huge head kick, or catches him coming in with like a flying knee or something. Because otherwise, I actually like Filho in the striking. Osbourne is quick, he's crisp, but he doesn't have great head movement. He's easy to back into the cage. People have done that and punished him there. Shorter fighters with shorter arms have gotten inside on him pretty effortlessly. I mean, Tyson Nam had no trouble, getting into the phone booth with him. So I think Filho will be fine if it's on the feet, and if it goes on the ground, Osbourne is tricky and opportunistic, and his just physical shape presents matchup problems. But Filho is very, very good on the ground and just much more fundamentally positionally sound. I don't think Osbourne is going to take Filho's back in a scramble, or catch anything just kind of exotic. I think Filho finishes this. Osbourne generally does not like Osbourne kind of fights like he's double parked. He doesn't like to hear the final horn if he doesn't have to. Give me Filho to tap out Osbourne in the second round after a real fun 8 or 9 minutes of action.
Man, Ode Osbourne is such a weird dude where someone convinced me he's really good. I don't want to say really good, but someone convinced me he's good. But then you watch the tape and you're like, well, he's big for the division. He can hit pretty hard.
You can make a highlight reel that makes him look incredible.
And then you can also make one that makes him look terrible.
Yes, it's the Julian Erosa thing, isn't it?
It's like, when you climb a fence as a kid and you're like just stuck on the top. What, like that's just like, okay, do I go? That's kind of how I feel about this dude. Picking him in a fight is the definition of just always being on the fence, because the dudes he loses against, I mean, outside of Tyson Nam, but getting knocked the fuck out by Tyson Nam is how you lose to Tyson Nam. You either have a weird, your fight either goes to a weird decision or he absolutely ices you. But outside of that, like Brian Kelleher in round 1 in 2020, when he got guillotined, like that's how Brian Kelleher was beating everyone in 2020. Sorry. Like that's Brian Kelleher's thing, snatching up a guillotine, getting flying kneed by Manel Kopp. Like that's Manel Kopp's thing. That's what Manel Kopp does to people. What did Tyson Nam do? Knock him out. That's what Tyson Nam does. Asu Almabayev, what does he do? He's a very good grappler and he submits people. Like it's just, if you have a thing you're really good at, like that's how you beat Ode Osbourne. Yep. But if you're just like an MMA dude that just does like MMA stuff like him, like Charles Johnson, he can have a close fight with you. Charles Johnson is very good everywhere, but not dangerous anywhere. He's good enough everywhere. And I think Filho is, based off of him being able to hang with Makayev on the ground and grab that knee bar that would have submitted anyone else in the world. It just feels like if you have a thing and you can do your thing to Ode Osbourne, I don't really know another way to describe it. And before you started talking, I kind of was like, hey, maybe Ode Osbourne could pull this off. But then you look at the way he loses, and if you have a specialty, that's how you beat him. Like all the specialists beat Ode Osbourne, whether it be a striking specialist, knockout artist, submission guy, grappler. And I think that's what we'll get here. I think Filho will they'll probably have some close exchanges on the feet. Ode Osbourne's really long. He has a good jab. He's got good kicks. But if this thing goes to the ground, I could just see Ode Osbourne, maybe trying to get to his feet and Filho taking the back and squeezing his head off at some point.
So what's the call?
Give me Filho by submission, second round.
Next up on the UFC Vegas 88 undercard is a women's bantamweight matchup between Josiane Nunes and Chelsea Chandler. Nunes, the 30-year-old Brazilian, is 10-1 overall. She's 3-0 in the UFC and on a 9-fight win streak overall. Having said that, all 3 of her fights in the UFC have been at 145 pounds. Those are wins over Bea Malecki, Ramona Pascual, and Zara Ferran dos Santos. The most recent of those, the Zara Ferran fight, was last January at UFC 283, where Nunes took a unanimous decision. She'll be dropping the bantamweight here, and will be facing Chandler, who will be doing the same.
Will they?
More on that in a minute. Chandler, 30-year-old Stockton, California native, the one they call Chick Diaz. 5-2 overall, 1-1 in the UFC. She fought most recently at UFC on ESPN Holm versus Bueno Silva last July, where she dropped a unanimous decision to Norma Dumont. Prior to that, she had a first-round knockout of Yulia Stolyarenko all the way back in October of 2022. Chandler here as well, dropping to 135 pounds, or will be attempting to do so. Odds are fairly close, but Nunes is your favorite. She's minus 135, Chandler plus 110. You kind of said it. This card is evidence that the UFC really does plan to shutter the women's featherweight division, because there are 2 women's bantamweight bouts on this card. And this one features 2 women dropping to 135. And then the one further up the card, Macy Chiasson and Pannie Kianzad both joined the UFC as 145-pounders. Kianzad has been down at 135 ever since, but Chiasson has fought back and forth and has missed weight at both. Chiasson, I believe, is the heaviest woman ever to have fought in the UFC when she weighed in at like 150 or 151 pounds. So I'm going to give you my picks for these fights, but if you can lay money on one of these fights not actually taking place at 135 pounds, hammer it. Anyway, Josiane Nunes.
She's the only one that can make 135.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
But maybe not.
But even if they keep the 145-pound division, she might have to come down anyway, because there should be a little sign outside saying you must be this tall to ride. She is, she's the women's. She's 5'2" or 5'3". She's not a small 145. It's hard to describe her physique without sounding like I'm being insulting. So I'm just going to say she's very short for the weight class. She's broad and has big muscles, fairly long arms. She's a short, squat woman.
She's got long reach for someone her size.
Yes. Like, I think she has to wear high heels so that her knuckles don't drag on the ground. Like, she got long arms. She is a striker, but she's kind of an old school shoot a box. Like, you could compare her striking style to like
Wanderlei Silva.
well, like worst Wanderlei Silva, or like super early like Chris Cyborg, where they'll call it Muay Thai, but it's mostly just putting your head down and throwing huge
fastballs
through huge haymakers with both hands. If she can get inside, like, she will grab the clinch and like punish with knees and elbows, but mostly she's just a slugger, a basic slugger, and fighting, mediocre 135 pounders outside the UFC and then mediocre 145 pounders in the UFC. It's been enough to, I think there's one decision in there, but I think she's knocked out her last she knocked out like 6 opponents in a row, and then she had a couple of decisions. The size deficit against Chandler is not going to phase her. In the UFC, she's fought Bea Malecki, Ramona Pascual, and Zara Ferran. All 3 of them are big, and Bea Malecki might be the biggest woman that's ever fought in the UFC. She's even bigger than Macy Chiasson.
Zara Ferran is huge too.
Yeah, Zara Ferran, like, she's not as tall, but she's just huge.
And so is Ramona Pascual.
Well,
like, those
Pascual,
are all huge.
Yeah, Pascual, not the tallest again, but just huge.
Big.
And on the ground, she's not a complete dope on the ground. She just clearly doesn't want to be there. She's kind of a sprawl and brawler. When she's been put on the ground, most of her effort seems to be towards just getting back up. Like, we're not even talking about sweeps or escapes with names. We're talking like the Derek Lewis, Czech Congo, I'm going to bench press you off me and stand up type thing. It's a very basic skill set. It's been fine for her so far. soon she's going to run into the person who makes her look just basic and untrained. I don't know if it's going to be Chandler, but from here on out, she's not going to get any fights easier than Chandler. Chandler, she's a Caesar Gracie. I don't know what belt she is, but Caesar Gracie is always famously underbelted his people. I mean, Nick Diaz, still a purple belt, one of the best grapplers in the UFC for a couple of years. But kind of like a Diaz brother, she's comfortable on the ground, but would rather slug it out on the feet. She has decent power. She's not terribly athletic. She is big. Doesn't have good footwork, doesn't have good head movement. Niftier strikers.
Footwork. What do you mean?
Oh, dear God.
That's why I'm sitting here smiling, because I just remember, was that not the most viral moment of 2023?
Which one?
Her hitting the Usain Bolt against Norma Dumont, turning around and hitting a 4 flat. If the cage was if they were in a park, she would have just kept running. Yep. She was running home. You ever seen a kid, you've seen those videos where there's two kids getting into a fight, one kid gets hit and he goes, hell no, I'm out of here. And they run away. If there was more, if that cage was open, she had ran out of it. She was ready to go. Just fight or flight, got rocked and was like, I'm out.
He was like, I'm out.
That's not a Diaz brother thing.
It was no, not a Diaz brother thing. Unless it was Diaz brother in the sense that she just was training for her next triathlon.
Sure. Yeah, could have.
But yeah, it was certainly the moment in the UFC last year that looked most like it came from Break.com or World Star.
That was awesome.
Basically, all I know about Chandler is that she's better than Yulia Stoliarenko. You're not just going to be able to run up, grab her arm, try to pull guard. She's just going to no-sell the armbar and punch the shit out of you. And I know that she had nothing for Norma Dumont. Nunes, of the two, Nunes isn't as good as Dumont, but she's going to offer something closer to what Dumont did than Stoliarenko, because Nunes at least is going to come forward and swing. We know that is, she is the most predictable, has the most predictable approach. She's going to come forward and she's going to swing. Chandler is going to be way taller. Obviously, she's going to have reach. If she has any kind of footwork, she should be able to keep Nunes at bay and jab her up, or meet her with a knee or an uppercut coming in. But Chandler, at least when she doesn't just turn her back and run away from you, is really easy to back into the cage, and that plays right into Nunes's game. There is upset value here. If it goes to the ground, Chandler's a good grappler. Nunes is not, and Chandler is, she's as big as the women that Nunes has been fighting, is probably better on the ground than Zara Farn or Ramona Pasquale. She's better at everything than Ramona Pasquale, but I just don't see it. I don't think Chelsea Chandler is long for the UFC.
No,
I don't think Nunes is a future top 10 fighter even at 135, which is a bare bones division right now. But I think she's going to have enough to get past Chandler. The real question to me is whether she can put enough leather on her to actually finish the thing. I'm not going to pick that. Dumont hits at least as hard as Nunes and throws good volume, and she couldn't. But give me Nunes to punish Chandler, make her look miserable. I could see Chandler trying to bring this thing to the ground and maybe not being able to. Give me Nunes in a pretty one-sided decision here, where Chandler looks beat up and maybe by the third round doesn't especially look as though she wants to be there.
Chelsea, and she did finish Julia Stoliarenko, but number one, that's Julia Stoliarenko. And number two, Chelsea Chandler is also 2 weight classes bigger than her. Chelsea Chandler's huge compared to her. And that's really if she wasn't from the Diaz camp, she wouldn't probably even be in the UFC. Scouts go to camps, the whole thing. And I just don't, if this was any other division outside of women's, if she didn't come in as a women's featherweight, she probably wouldn't have even come in as a women's bantamweight. But I'm pretty sure they've just told the whole featherweight division, hey, cut to 35 or rip up your UFC contract because you're not a UFC fighter anymore.
Or prepare to meet Kayla Harrison in PFL or Bellator sometime next year. Yeah.
Or Larissa Pacheco or yeah. You like fighting at 145? Okay. Or you can get a fight with Clarissa Shields at 165 or whatever the Clarissa Shields MMA weight. But with this fight here, I like Josiane Nunes just because I think watching her fight is funny. Because someone with her stature at women's 145 like shouldn't win fights at all. But she does she has no physical attributes for this division, but the one that she does have big arms and she does hit hard, so she knows how to use her physical attributes to the best of her ability, at least. And Chelsea Chandler just doesn't do that. I feel like Chelsea Chandler showed us last time that when things don't go her way, she's willing to literally run away from them. And that is kind of, I feel like as a fighter at this level, that's something that's just inherent. Like if you've got that in you, look at Max Roshklov. If that's in you, that's something that's real, real hard to break. I think she is going to walk Chelsea Chandler into the cage. She's got Josiane Nunes also has good dirty boxing. She's going to get an overhook and probably just spam overhand rights over and over again. And I don't think Chelsea Chandler's going to hit her with anything powerful enough to deter her from doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if Josiane Nunes got a stoppage, only because Norma Dumont wants to fight a very, the Timu version of Michael Venom Page, where she'll leap in with a big shot, crack you, and then clinch, and then break off and do the same thing. When Josiane Nunes is going to hit you Norma Dumont is not going to hit you with 20 shots in a row, but Josiane Nunes will. She will sit there and spam overhands like a windmill if you let her. And I think Chelsea Chandler's going to let her. Give me Josiane Nunes by decision, but a third round finish wouldn't surprise me either if Chandler's just like, this sucks.
Lightweights are up next as Natan Levy faces off against Mike Davis. Levy, the 32-year-old Israeli, is 8-1 overall. He is 2-1 since joining the UFC out of season 4 of Dana White's Contender Series. After dropping his UFC debut to Rafa Garcia, he chalked up back-to-back decision wins over Mike Breeden and Genaro Valdez. That's the good news. The bad news is the most recent of those. The Valdez win was back in December of 2022. So Levy is stepping back into the cage for the first time in over a year, same as several other fighters on this card. He will be stepping in against Davis. Davis, 31-year-old New York native, is 10-2 overall. He is 3-1 since joining the UFC out of season 2 of Dana White's Contender Series. He actually lost on the Contender Series, went back and won a couple more fights on the regional scene, then was signed in 2019. Had to step right in against Gilbert Burns, which is a hell of an assignment. That was on short notice. I forget who Burns was supposed to fight, but he came in on short notice to face Gilbert Burns. Lasted almost 2 full rounds. He racked up 3 straight wins since then, all of them pretty entertaining fights against Thomas Gifford, Mason Jones, and Slava Borshov. That's the good news. The bad news for him, even worse than for Levy, is that the most recent appearance for Davis was in October of 2022. He's been off for almost 18 months. So 2 gentlemen stepping back into the cage for the first time, since 2022. Davis is a strong, almost prohibitive favorite. Slightly surprising to me. I'll get to that when I get to it, but Davis is minus 300, Ooh. Levy plus 225 on the comeback. I'm going to flip this one to you first, Dev. Tell me what you think of this fight and who you think wins and how.
Natan Levy reads as a dude that is an incredible striker, but then when you really dive into the film, But I mean, minus 300, Mike Davis is crazy. I feel like Mike Davis should be like a minus 180 favorite. And I mean, just due to inactivity, like if he fought if he had beaten, even though Mason Jones, did not have a great career in the UFC, I think he's a lot better. And his Cage Warriors, his Cage Warriors fights will tell you that, because I think he either is or was a current Cage Warriors champion, like as soon as he left the UFC and went back. And I'm pretty sure he was a double champ over there, if I'm correct, before coming to the UFC. I think the Mason Jones win is a lot better of a win than it reads as. And even the Borishev is a good striker too. And clearly, I mean, we all know Borishev at this point, Slavokov, he's just look at his last fight. Borshev's in brawls and he can bang, and Mike Davis kind of cleanly beat him there. Gilbert Burns on short notice there's a couple fighters on this card that got the real freaking short end of the stick debuting in the UFC. Yeah. Culibao and Davis, and they're both good, and I think Davis is actually real good. Natan Levy, number one, I'm just curious on what these dudes do for money, because like they just haven't fought in so long. Like how do you, especially based off their fighter pay coming off the Contender Series, like what are the, curious, how do these dudes live? They haven't fought since 2020, end of 2022. Natan Levy, he is a striker. That's what he likes to do. But, if you follow him on social media and you watch him train, you'll have a very different idea of what he brings to the table compared to if you actually like start digging in on tape with him. Because like hitting pads, he looks like a dynamo. Sparring dudes that make fun of him on the internet, he looks like a dynamo. Don't know if you saw that semi recently. Some dudes kind of talk shit to him online, and he invited him over to his gym, and he kicked the shit out of him, of course.
I just a quick side note. I normally I'm very sensitive to fighters like getting in fights, like professional fighters getting in fights outside of professional settings. Like I feel uncomfortable like paying someone for violence that can't manage violence in his private life. Having said that, I 100% support fighters giving a dose of reality to people who talk shit to him online. Like 100%. Like Kevin Holland, like putting that dude on the bus, like giving the dude bus fare and then kicking his ass and putting him on the bus to go back home. One of my favorite moments of 2022. Natan Levy, like, yeah.
Arman Tsarukyan, now that we're talking about it, because this just comes, those guys that were talking shit to Tsarukyan down in Miami on their press tour for UFC 300.
Are you insane?
Number one, Arman Tsarukyan's like not a bad dude. Like he's not a bad guy. No. Like he hasn't done anything to make you say like, yeah, I hate the term keep that same energy, but like if you guys are gonna like if you're gonna talk that shit, just because Natan, people have this crazy false sense of reality. Like if you're not a title challenger, that like they think that they can like beat you in a fight. So like unless you're good. Hate to break it to you that anyone on the roster is gonna kick your fucking teeth.
Anyone on the roster, like people that like I nervously make fun of as like the worst fighters to pass through the UFC would clean my fucking clock. Like, I make it a point not to say anything that I wouldn't say, to anyone in person. Certainly somebody that could like kick my ass in 60 seconds. Like, yeah.
It just, that's something I think that needs to be said too. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you know that, but like, if you're one of those people from Miami that was like talking that shit to Arman Tsarukyan, like you wouldn't say that to my face, let alone him. So watch it.
Yeah.
Like watch it. Natan Levy, good for him for doing that, and let's teach these bullies a lesson. Don't be a bully. He's a very good fighter in the first round of a fight. And he can hang tough when facing adversity, Natan Levy, but he's like, you ever have a friend in high school that like souped up their real piece of shit Honda Civic? Like that sucker was real fast, but like the windows didn't really roll down right. The AC didn't work. He's shit just flying off once they start. That's kind of how Natan Levy goes in a long fight. The Hoffer Garcia fight. Alpha Garcia is a tough dude that does hit pretty hard, but going into the UFC, you kind of almost expected him to probably win that one. Mike Breeden no longer in the UFC and didn't have any wins besides the Jubilee win, which was really awesome. And then Genaro Valdez, is he still on the roster?
I am not sure whether he is or not, because
But he lost 3 fights in a row, and the Natan Levy fight was kind of sandwiched in there.
I mean, he has one more on his first 4-fight deal, so he might get another fight, but he's certainly on his way out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think I'm just curious on why Mike Davis hasn't fought, because he's too good. And like when he beat the Thomas Gifford fight, by the way, was one of the worst beatings in UFC history.
Yep.
If you've never seen that fight, like like poor Thomas Gifford. I think wasn't his dad his dad was in his corner too, watching that happen. That was just a really Mike Davis can be very brutal and very punishing. I think they're going to have a really close first round. I think standing offensively, they both offer very similar tools. They both have sharp boxing, both have a sharp kicking game. I think Mike Davis is the better boxer, especially prolonged exchanges. I think Natan Levy has much more of a karate style game where he wants to land one shot, exit, land a 2-punch. He's throwing 2 shots and getting out of dodge. Mm-hmm. And I think as this fight goes on, Mike Davis's ability to stay composed in the pocket and just be punishing there, throwing 3, 4, 5 punch combinations, ending those combinations with kicks. Minus 300 is crazy, but at the same time, I could see him getting like a 3rd round finish because Natan Levy takes a lot of damage and he doesn't have great defense at all. You know what? I'm going to pick Mike Davis to win by knockout in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you put down there. Like if you didn't make the point, I was going to make the point that Natan Levy presents as a striker. He's got the side-on karate stance, and he'll throw very karate style, like long kicks, like like round kicks or side kicks, and he looks like a bad guy from a martial arts movie. Like totally. Not because he looks like a bad guy, but just this angular, ripped physique, that kind of like pseudo mohawk. Like
he's shredded.
He and Carlos Ulberg just look like bad guys from a kickboxing movie.
Yes,
Ulberg like the super good-looking, cocky guy. But but it hasn't really translated into being much of a plus striker at the UFC level, and part of it is what you mentioned. He just too often throws 1 shot at a time, 1 or 2 shots at a time. That's not something you can build on unless you're truly special, like Lyoto Machida, Wonderboy Thompson, Michael Page type fighter.
Anderson Silva. And he's not that.
And Anderson Silva, and even Anderson Silva would start like chain gunning techniques when people came at him. But yeah, in someone like Levy, who he is a good striker, it just turns into a guy that doesn't throw enough volume to consistently win rounds if somebody doesn't get hurt badly. That's part of the reason I think that Davis is the kind of favorite he is. I think Davis, they're about the same age, but Davis just, like, he feels younger. I know that sounds weird to say, but he's going to be way bigger. It's insane that Mike Davis used to fight at featherweight. Like, he fought at featherweight regionally, and even tried to in the UFC. Like, they tried to match him against Giga Chikadze a couple times at featherweight, which would have been a fucking banger. But I think once, like, they tried it twice, and once Davis fell out for some reason, the other time Giga did, so I guess it wasn't meant to be. But Davis is huge. And I think he's effective from a wider variety of ranges than Levy is. Like, if they get the fight that Levy wants, an outside pot shotting battle, I think Davis can hold his own there. And on the inside, I think Davis is more dangerous. I think he's better in the clinch. I think his up close boxing is better. I find it unlikely this fight would go to the ground, but if it does, that might represent some of Levy's like best chances to win. He's, I believe he has some judo in his background. He's exactly as strong as he looks on the ground, and he's proven himself capable at least of like guillotining or arm triangling tired, or stunned opponents on the ground. So that's always an option. And hell, if Levy sticks around, he may become one of those types like, I don't know, Mike Perry that presents as a striker, but actually their wrestling and grappling proved to be their secret weapon. But for this, there are a lot of unknowns when it's two guys that have been gone for over a year, but assuming neither one of them is severely compromised, they're both roughly the same fighter they were. I like Davis in this one. And as a minus 300 favorite, I don't think he's 3 times as good as Levy, but the fact that Levy isn't great at winning close rounds, and the fact that Levy, he has a gas tank problem, and it's not a gas tank problem where he just wilts and he's dead and anyone can push him over with a feather, but
his offense just freaking
exactly.
tanks.
His already low output gets even lower,
and his defense, he just gets hit a lot. Like
exactly. So if this is even if this is 1 round apiece at the end of 2, I'm feeling pretty good about Davis. So I'm with you. Davis by decision here seems like the logical call. The top prelim at UFC Fight Night 239 is a lightweight clash between Thiago Moises and the debuting Mitch Ramirez. Moises, the 28-year-old Brazilian, is 17-7 overall. He is 7-5 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series Brazil. He lost his last time out, dropping a fight to Benoit Saint-Denis by second round knockout at UFC Paris in September. Prior to that, he had been on a 2-fight win streak over Christos Giagos and Melquizael Costa. He will look to get back in the win column this Saturday in Las Vegas. He had been scheduled to take on Brad Riddell, but Riddell fell out with an injury. In steps the debuting Ramirez. 31-year-old Utah native fighting out of Las Vegas is 8-1 overall. He fought on the Contender Series last August, got knocked out in the second round by Carlos Prates, went back and won 1 fight in LFA, and here he gets the short notice call. He is the underdog. Moises is minus 210, Riddell plus 170. It's a shame. Moises versus Riddell was one of the fights I was low-key most looking forward to on this card, as just 2 guys who had hit the edges of the top 10, but had lost a couple fights, and both young enough that it was wide open for either guy to prove that he was, still a future contender. We don't get that. Now we get Moises, taking on, a short notice opponent who got lamped on the Contender Series. The UFC did what it could with the time it had. It's hard for me to believe that Thiago Moises is only 28 years old. Now, he'll be 29 in like a week or 2, but still, he's been in the UFC long enough, and he's fought enough high card positions and big names that it just feels like he should be like 32 or 34. He still has plenty of time to fix the issues. One of the problems is that he won enough fights early on that he got a little overranked. Like I'm not going to use the word overrated because that's just, it sounds dismissive and insulting, but pretty early on, like in his early UFC run, he lost to Beneil Dariush and Damir Ismagulov. No shame there. Then he rattles off 3 straight wins against Michael Johnson, Bobby Green, and Alexander Hernandez. And all 3 of those wins, especially at the time, looked pretty good. Green has gone on to really elevate himself since then. Hernandez looked like a good win at the time. That got him to a fight against Islam Makhachev. Moises was in no way ready for that. Because what Moises was at that time, and still is to some extent now, is a little bit of an old school grappling specialist who just doesn't look like one. Like he looks like a guy that should be a better striker than he is, but he is kind of an old school grappling specialist, and a one-dimensional grappler is the absolute last guy you want to throw at Islam Makhachev. But
he's at ATT too, which is just like astounding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because he has like no kicking game.
Yeah, this is a guy.
And he's grown up at ATT.
Yes,
like his whole life.
Yeah, he's been at ATT, I think literally since he was a teenager. He's come up training with longtime ATT standbys, people like Dustin Poirier, and still his striking's a liability. And that's basically it. Like, he's, at least at this point, he's kind of plateaued into a fighter who can really shine and take advantage of fighters who can't threaten him on the feet. Like, if he, like, good example, Michael Johnson styled on him in the first round of their fight. Like, it wasn't a 10-8, but it was a really dominant first round. It was as good as Michael Johnson had looked in a while. And Moises tapped him like 20 seconds into the next round. Like, just Johnson blundered. That's it. Like, even if you can put it on Moises, like, he's one mistake away from being able to make you pay. But if you have good power, like a sprawl and brawler, like Benoit Saint-Denis destroyed Thiago Moises. He was the worst possible kind of style matchup for him. Just because, yeah, Benoit Saint-Denis was bigger, stronger, a hard hitter. Just, yeah, Moises was stuck in hell. He couldn't get him down. And unlike Johnson, who was just kind of piecing him up, Saint-Denis was hurting him and punishing him for coming inside. Kind of same with Joel Alvarez. I mean, Alvarez is not a perfect prospect either, but he's a huge lightweight.
He just crushed him.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Joel Alvarez did to Thiago Moises what Arman Sarukian did to him.
Yeah.
Like, just crushed him. Like, just went out there, which is like, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Here, I mean, Ramirez comes in little heralded, to say the least. He got knocked. I mean, he got flatlined on the Contender Series by Carlos Prates, who's just kind of a middling prospect himself.
But that's
But having said that, yeah. But having said that, Ramirez by nature tries to do what is the route to victory against Moises. I mean, he's going to want to try to sprawl and brawl. You know, he's a kickboxer with good power, good kicks, throws straight punches, doesn't always throw in combination. Sometimes will kind of like leave his hands hanging. He's susceptible to counters, but I don't think that's something that Moises is really going to make him pay for. I'm leaning Moises. I mean, he's a 2-1 favorite for a reason. He is much, much, much more seasoned at this level. I at this point, the best fighter Ramirez has ever fought is Carlos Prates, and Moises has fought literally 15 people that are much better than that. Ramirez also, like, he's a good striker. He has got good, he has good power, but he doesn't really have kill you with one shot power. So it could even be like a thing like the Johnson fight where Ramirez has a great first round. Like, Moises can't get him down. Ramirez's jab is stuck to his face. He's kicking Moises's like leg. He's looking great. If he gets a little tired, this is a short notice appearance. If he makes a mistake, like if Moises just manages to get inside on him and trip him to the ground, I think it could be over. We haven't seen too much of Ramirez's ground game, even on the regional scene. He tapped out a couple people early, but it was people who were either horrifically overmatched or that he'd already hurt on the feet. And we didn't get to see much of it. Like they were on the ground for 20 seconds. He wrapped up a choke and it was over. He's not doing that to Thiago Moises. If they go to the ground, it's going to be him trying to survive Thiago Moises. So give me Moises here, and I'm going to say he gets it done by second round submission. The real question to me, the real variable, will be whether he does it in a way that makes him look good, or does it in a way that makes us just relieved on the recap that he didn't have to face Brad Riddell on Saturday.
This fight has all the potential to look like a bunch of the fights from UFC 299, where it's like going one way, and then all of a sudden it's just a complete U-turn. Mitch Ramirez also, I'm pretty sure he fought Prates on short notice on the Contender Series up a weight class, because he's a 55er, and I know that fight was up at 70, and I think he was short notice. And like he just kind of wants to brawl a lot, and like a long, lanky sniper like Prates is just gonna, I mean, bless his heart, look what he just did to Trevin Giles, you know. Like, that's just Prates's thing, you know. Even if it was I mean, he was losing the Trevin Giles fight before he came back and sparked him, but that's just kind of Prates's thing. He's just big, long,
and that's also Trevin Giles's thing.
Yeah, quite,
to be winning the fight until he gets caught.
It's just he's such an interesting dude. So like Prates knocking out Ramirez, like him not taking that fight would have probably been better for his career, just because he's like still so young in his career. But at least it got his name on the map. But he's 31. He's, in my opinion, like too old to be making his debut, but he also has like way too little. He does have an amateur career. I think he has like 3 or 4 fights in his amateur career, but like as an 31 debuting in the UFC with like a pro record of 6 fights is just at 155. Like, he's not a heavyweight and he's not a woman's bantamweight. So it just, it's a short notice for a reason. Thiago Moises is a dude, like, you look at his record. If you just look at names on Thiago Moises's record, you're like, wow, he's fought the who's. Like, he's fought Beneil Dariush. Even, he's got a win over Kurt Holobaugh. Like, that's not a, that's a good, like, Kurt Holobaugh's decent. He's fought Beneil Dariush, Damir Ismagulov. The Michael Johnson fight was a typical Michael Johnson fight where, like, yeah, you submitted him, but you kind of got it's a win, but it's the closest win to a loss that you could have, but you could also say the same thing about his Bobby Green fight. Like, you probably should have lost that fight. But then when he fights a short notice opponent like he did last year against Melky Costa, like, he just went out there and iced him. He's it's just such an, like, the way he looked against Melky Costa going into the Benoit Saint Denis fight, you're like, Moises could probably do something here. Nope. And like, it's just, and Christos Giagos, like, he went out there and kind of shit kicked him pretty easy too. And Giagos is like not a terrible fighter. I think Mitch Ramirez's skill level is much closer to like a Melky Costa and Christos Giagos than, like, truly dangerous dudes beat the shit out of Thiago Moises. And I just don't think Mitch Ramirez is like one of those, like, truly dangerous dudes that can, lock down. I mean, it's Islam Makhachev, but outside of that, like, Thiago Moises can be a pretty good grappler. He's got a very good top game. And that's his thing. And I just think Mitch Ramirez is short notice. He already likes to brawl. Like, his MMA game is to just, like, make a lot of stuff happen. And on short notice against Thiago Moises, like, Melky tried that, and Melky's a better fighter than Ramirez. I'm gonna go with Thiago Moises to probably get a first round submission. But don't be surprised if he gets, like, cracked and dazed and gets, like, shook up and scared at some point.
Next up is a matchup between 2 intriguing featherweight prospects in Christian Rodriguez and Isaac Dulgarian. Rodriguez, the 26-year-old Rufasport product, is 10-1 overall. He's 3-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of season 5 of Dana White's Contender Series. He fought, he won, he was not immediately signed, so he went back to I forget which regional show it was, but anyway, he won one more fight, got signed to the UFC. From there, he lost to Jonathan Pierce in his debut, but since then he has rattled off 3 straight wins over Joshua Weems, Raul Rosas Jr., and Cameron Simon. The most recent of those, the Simon win, was in October of last year at UFC Fight Night, Yusuf versus Barboza. Of course, the one that really put Rodriguez's name in everybody's mouth was him handing Rosas Jr. his first professional loss. But he will look to make it 4 wins in a row for himself and maybe hand another touted prospect his first loss in the form of Dulgarian. Dulgarian, 27-year-old Missouri native fighting out of Colorado, is 6-0 as a pro. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He made his debut last August at UFC on ESPN, Luque versus Dos Anjos, where he pounded out Francis Marshall in the first round. Marshall himself, not a bad prospect either. So Dulgarian will look to keep his pro record undefeated. He is moderately favored to do so. Dulgarian is -160, Rodriguez +130. Dev, I'll flip this one to you. I know you're high at least on one of these guys as a prospect. Let me know what you think of this fight, the upside of these two guys, and how you think it goes.
So this is at 145 as well, where Christian Rodriguez had missed weight his last time out and has, they told him walk the plank basically.
Yep.
And he's had a lot of issues. Didn't he miss weight against Raul Rosas Jr. as well?
Let me make sure, because I knew this was his move up to 145.
But he's had weight issues, like quite a bit of them in the past.
Yeah, Rodriguez missed weight for his last 2 fights. It's kind of wild that he missed weight against Rosas when Rosas is the guy that looks absolutely gigantic for the division. But yeah, he missed weight twice in a row, so they told him, get you up to 145.
The craziest thing too is, like, look what the UFC is doing look what they've been doing with Africa as a whole. Cameron Simon was a pretty highly touted prospect that seems to be very well known in that part of the world. And I'm just really surprised that the UFC had him fight Raul Rosas, a dude that they put a shit ton of, media behind and everything. Like, they put a lot of money into this kid, and then they kind of turn around. He missed weight, and then they just turn around and do it all over. Like, sometimes the UFC makes matchups that make total sense, and sometimes we scratch our heads when they get made, and then there's the outcome, and we're like, okay, well, I guess we do know why they did that. But having him, Joshua Weems and then Raul Rosas Jr. and Cameron Simon, like 2 dudes that people like me and you were, at least one, like I was pretty high on Cameron Simon.
Yeah. Like, Simon has looked good.
Especially, being Adricus du Plessis, like one of his main training part, like there's just a lot there with that kid. So I'm just surprised that they and Christian Rodriguez isn't a nobody, but he's you could walk past him in a mall and you wouldn't know that he's a UFC, and you can't say the same for, his past 2 opponents. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, all I'd say is that it made sense with Raul Rosas, because Raul Rosas, despite the weight miss and everything, came in as like a massive favorite. He was a bigger than 2-1 favorite. So it was going to be a great building moment if you believed in Rosas. Oh, he beat a good guy in Christian Rodriguez, and Rodriguez even missed weight. Like, that's fantastic. But when he came in against Cameron Simon, he missed weight by 5 whole pounds, and he was the favorite. Like, at least the bettors and the bookies knew that he was not a great matchup for Simon. So it was an interesting bit of matchmaking there. And maybe at this point, they're just like, okay, Rodriguez is a good fighter on his own terms. Maybe we just need to start promoting him, kind of like it took the UFC a minute to realize what they had in Kelvin Gastelum, like something like that.
Sure. And this at 145, I think at 135 is where he needs to be, but he's just got that same like Ray Borg issue where like you're a good fighter, but like you just can't get the weight. Just like Kelvin Gastelum,
That's why I said Gastelum.
Like a dude that just can't like. Christian Rodriguez does a lot of things well. He's a good boxer. He's got pretty decent power. His ability to, just stay composed, like in a gritty, weird, ugly fight. Like, he can meet you where you're best at. And even if you're better than him there, it's not enough to finish the fight. And if he can get through that, he can get to where he's good, and kind of squeeze things out like he did against Cameron Simon. That was a close fight. Like, it could have been a 30-27 one way, but all rounds were close, where he just seemed to be bigger, more physical than Simon and hit harder than Simon, but a lot of great scrambles in that fight. He can scramble his ass off. But going up to face a dude like Dulgarian, Isaac Dulgarian is this dude's a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
I think the UFC is doing the same thing they did with Raul Rosas, but maybe just not dumping the promotional coin into Isaac Dulgarian, but I'm pretty sure that they're expecting the same outcome. Clearly we know Raul Rosas isn't that great as we thought he was, but I actually think Isaac Dulgarian is probably even better than the UFC thought Raul Rosas Jr. is. Isaac Dulgarian is an absolute problem, and he has like the perfect MMA game to be successful in the UFC, where he's got great takedowns. He's a great chain wrestler. He's got great control. And when he gets people on the ground, he wants to absolutely fucking ice them. Like, he wants to take you down, get a Dagestani handcuff and then elbow your head off, or ground and pound your head off. Like, that's just his game. If he punishes you enough and you give up a submission, like, he will try to do that. But all of his wins are via finish, and they're a mixture of submissions and elbows or punches, and they all come off of his just he's very athletic. Like, his shot is quick as shit. He has, and all of, like, getting arm triangles at featherweight, like, you got to be real freaking strong to do that. You've got to have a Christian Rodriguez is not the biggest dude. And I mean, he's given up takedowns to Cameron Simon, and having close, they're going kind of tit for tat in scrambles. I just see Isaac Dulgarian taking him down with his first takedown attempt. And maybe I'm wrong about Christian Rodriguez. Like, maybe I should be more hype on him, but I think Dulgarian is like the best prospect on this whole card. Like, I think he has the best upside on the whole card. Give me Isaac Dulgarian to take Christian Rodriguez down, elbow him a bunch, force him to give his back, and choke him out. Round one, rear naked choke.
Yeah, I like a lot of the analysis there. I am now a reluctant believer in Rodriguez. Like, I say that like I personally don't like the guy. Just, it took a minute to come around on him because
the weight misses.
The weight misses are not a good look. I mean, if you're missing weight in your mid-20s in a division that you're not visibly oversized for, well, there's a reason I said Kelvin Gastelum. Like, dude, it's never going to get easier than this to make 170 pounds. What's the problem? Like, normally I don't care if fighters pop for weed. I'm glad that it's sort of been, quote, decriminalized in MMA in a lot of jurisdictions. But in the case of Kelvin Gastelum, I'm like, dude, weed is the gateway drug to burritos, and you don't need more of those. So, like, yeah, that's not a great look for Rodriguez. The other thing is that as a guy who's good at everything but not great at any one thing and isn't a jump out of the cage athlete, like, it just took me a minute to come around on how good he is. Like, he's a very good fighter. I agree with everything you said about Dulgarian, and I think he was actually kind of helped because in 2022, beginning of 2022, like this time 2 years ago, he was 5-0 with 5 first round finishes, and like only one of them had gone past the midway point of the first round. And that is when Glory MMA and Fitness, like, that was the year Glory MMA and Fitness imploded, and he was like their best homegrown prospect. I think he would have been maybe in the UFC sooner or on the Contender Series and against stiffer competition otherwise. Like, I think he got a little reprieve because he had to take a little time off. I think it's great that he ended up at Factory X.
Yeah.
There are a lot of great teams in this sport. And there are a lot of different coaches with different coaching styles. Some work for one fighter that don't work for another. But the one constant is what's at a premium is training partners, quality training partners. And Factory X is not only a great team, but it has a ton of people in that general weight range. Like, you walk in there and they have a couple dozen very good guys at 135 through 155.
Sure.
So, and they're at altitude, they're outside of Denver.
Yep.
That gives me a little hope because my main concern is that Dulgarian has still never been past the first round. The one time he even came close against Marshall in his last fight, it was a fight he was completely dominating. And it's always easier to have good cardio when no one is pushing you to do anything you don't want to. Like, the example I always use is BJ Penn. Like, everybody always shit on his cardio, but he only gassed out when he was losing. Like, he had plenty of cardio to go 3 or 5 rounds if he's dictating the pace. It's when other people are pushing him, like, anyway. Because what do we know about Christian Rodriguez? Well, he beat Raul Rosas Jr. by out-toughing, outlasting, and out-cardioing him. And yeah, he had the unfair advantage of missing weight by 2 pounds, but here, he's not even going to have, like, he probably won't even have to cut that much weight. So if Dulgarian doesn't club and sub him in the first round, what does this thing look like after 9 minutes? What does it look like after 13 minutes? I'm a believer in Dulgarian. in everything we've seen, and really we've seen everything out of him other than his late fight cardio and maybe how he looks when he isn't the better wrestler. Like, there's always the question, what will it look like when he's not the better wrestler? Well, Christian Rodriguez isn't going to teach us that, but he may teach us what Dulgarian looks like when someone's pushing him late in the fight. This could be a serious coming out moment for Dulgarian if he just wastes Rodriguez, or better yet, if he, has kind of a competitive fight and turns it on in the middle of the fight. That would be even better. That would answer some questions about him. It could also be a huge speed bump if he wallops Rodriguez for about 4 minutes and then the wheels start falling off. I'm leaning Dulgarian here, but I think Rodriguez is tough enough that Dulgarian has to actually fight for 15 minutes. I'm saying this is Dulgarian's first fight to go to decision. I am picking him to win it, but I'm picking him to win it because I expect him to either sock away the first round in like emphatic 10-8 fashion, compromise Rodriguez badly enough that he has that advantage going forward, or maybe even by just winning the first 2 rounds. But give me Dulgarian by decision here in a fight where he actually gets pushed some, and maybe we learn a few things about him. Maybe this is one of those fights where neither guy loses too much stock, and it's one that we could see these guys meeting again sometime down the road for higher stakes. Next up on the UFC Vegas 88 main card is a middleweight matchup between Gerald Meerschaert and Bryan Barberena. Meerschaert, the 36-year-old Wisconsin native, is 35-17 overall. He is 10-9 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight losing streak. Got knocked out last April by Joe Pyfer in the first round, came back in August at UFC 292 and dropped a split decision to Andre Petroski. He will look to snap that losing streak at the expense of Barberena, who is on a 3-fight losing streak of his own. Barberena, 34-year-old. I mean, I know he's like fighting out of Minnesota. Anyway, 18-11 overall. He is 9-10 in the UFC. As I mentioned, he is on a 3-fight losing streak. Most recently, he moved up from welterweight, where he spent the bulk of his career, to middleweight, and was given a rough welcome in the form of Mahmoud Muradov. He dropped a unanimous decision there. So he now on a 3-fight losing streak spanning 2 weight classes. Job very possibly on the line here, and he is not favored to get it done, as Meerschaert is a comfortable -240 favorite, Barberena +200 on the comeback. All right, this is a weird fight. I mean, for one thing, it's weird to have a fight on a main card, even on a fight night, between 2 guys that have never been in the top 10 and are on a 3-fight losing streak and a 2-fight losing streak, respectively. I mean, if you're going to have a guy in a losing streak on a main card, it's usually someone like Thiago Moises or Ovince St. Preux that like made it to the top 10 or even made it to a title shot. These guys have never really been ranked, and both are probably on the downslope of their careers. It's a weird matchup. It's a weird card placement, but I don't hate it. Meerschaert, I mean, he is what he is. I said this about somebody else earlier down the card. I said it about Chad Anheliger. Meerschaert is fighting probably as well as he ever has at age 36. And the reason for that is even when he was 26, plus athleticism was never what made his game go. What makes Meerschaert's game go is incredible toughness, heart, cardio, and a very opportunistic submission game. Like, he's done it many times in the UFC. I believe he's the UFC's now all-time leader in guillotine choke submissions or something like that. But what he does over and over again is he gets his ass whooped for about the first 9 minutes of a fight, turns it on, and ends up guillotining his opponent or taking him down and slapping a rear naked choke on him. It's what he did on the regional scene. It's what he's done in the UFC for almost 10 years now. It's the Gerald Meerschaert thing. He's going to do it until the wheels fall off. And even now, he's like, he guillotined Bruno Silva just like a year and a half ago. The gap in athleticism between Bruno Silva and Gerald Meerschaert is about as high as we ever saw in the cage in the UFC that year. He hasn't looked great in his last 2 fights. Well, the Petroski fight was close, but he got blown out of the water by Joe Pyfer. But Pyfer is huge, young, and an outstanding athlete who hits like a truck. Maybe Pyfer's the kind of guy that 1 or 2 times out of 10, Meerschaert could survive the first round and make things interesting late, but a lot of times he's just going to get lamped by that kind of fighter. Petrosky, another one who, like, not as explosive as Pfeiffer, but a big, strong, athletic middleweight. And Petrosky being a good wrestler, that's rough because Meerschaert has underrated wrestling, and that's something that he uses to finish compromised foes. Get him down into his world. That wasn't going to work as well on Petrosky. Everything lines up for him to shine against Barberena, because not only is Barberena moving up, like, he's moved up to 185 after not being a very big 170.
Oh, he's going to be pudgy. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, he was against Muradov, and Barberena is, I mean, Keith believes, and I might not agree, but I don't laugh at it. Barberena might have the worst defensive wrestling of any fighter, like, outside of heavyweight in the UFC. Like, his takedown defense is absolutely terrible. And even at 170, he had a reputation as an action fighter, but that was kind of code for a guy that threw pretty good volume but didn't have great power. So all the usual routes to victory against Gerald Meerschaert, like hit him hard and don't let him take you down, are gone. Normally, Meerschaert is a guy that I like to pick when he's the underdog. This is about as comfortable as I've ever felt taking Meerschaert as a favorite. Like, for Barberena to win this fight, something would have to go really, really strange and unexpectedly. This may be one of those rare fights where Meerschaert is the bully.
He's big. He's going to be a lot bigger.
He is. He's big. And there are only a few fights, like, against Dustin Stoltzfus. Like, Meerschaert was he was the bigger, like, he was the better striker. Like, it's not often that Meerschaert is the better striker in the first round of a fight.
Makhmed Muradov. I don't know what happened in that fight. Weird ass fight. But, like, he's out there, like, outboxing Muradov.
Outboxing Muradov, tapped him out. Obviously against Duran Win. This is going to be another one of those fights where Meerschaert might not have to hang around and, like,
survive anything.
Court reconstructive surgery. He might just be able to put it on Barberena from the beginning. Meerschaert, he's not super fast, but he has a decent jab that he's willing to throw out there. For people that kind of come in and crash the pocket, and Barberena is going to need to come inside of his reach because Meerschaert is taller and has longer arms. Meerschaert is good in the clinch. He uses the clinch to kind of slow down faster fighters than himself. He can put some punishment on there, and he's pretty good at avoiding punishment himself. And as always, like, from the clinch, he's good at slapping on a guillotine, especially against the shorter fighter. Give me Meerschaert here, and I'm going to say he gets it done. Hell, I'm going to say he gets a first round submission. I'm going to say, like, he does put it on him a little on the feet early on. An early collision ends with Meerschaert maybe tripping Barberena to the canvas, or even doing the ill-advised slap on a guillotine and fall to guard. But Meerschaert could then sweep the top and finish with a mounted guillotine. But yeah, give me Meerschaert to just really kind of dominate Bryan Barberena for as long as this goes. And I'm saying that's not very long. Meerschaert by first round sub.
Yeah, this is such a funny. I think, the scene in Lord of the Rings where all the riders, they're Theoden is screaming death, death, death. Yes. I think that's probably why this is on the main card, because the UFC is like, well, Bryan Barberena gets submitted very easily, and Gerald Meerschaert is the most likely fighter to just die by getting hit one time as well. So that's, even though Bryan Barberena hurt Vicente Luque, but, like, it's been a very long time since he punched Robbie Lawler like a million times.
Yeah.
And, like, couldn't beat up.
The UFC booth is going to talk about him like he's Matt Brown.
Yeah. And what's like, how many fights in the UFC is that win over Robbie Lawler in 2019? Or was it 2020? Let me look. Like, how many fights is that going to get him?
It was 2022, but he's lost 3 in a row since then.
Yeah, like, how many, like, you beat up Robbie Lawler in 2022, like, and you couldn't finish him. I don't know why Gerald Meerschaert just can't do the same thing RDA did. Like, obviously RDA is a much greater fighter in general than Gerald Meerschaert. However, he's 3 weight classes smaller.
Yeah.
And like that makes a difference. Gerald Meerschaert's big. Don't see why he doesn't just get on the front foot. Bryan Barberena is not some like slick back foot counterpuncher. He could just jab him 4 times, walk him into the cage, chain wrestle him against the cage, force him to give his back, or roll. Like Bryan Barberena's what he's bad at just kind of matches up with what Gerald Meerschaert can be good at.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's going to be one of those fights where Gerald Meerschaert has to hang tough, just because I don't think, in 2024, I don't think Bryan Barberena is venomous enough to make him have to survive anything, especially up at 185. He's already fought short, chubby dudes in Duran win. Give me Gerald Meerschaert to win by second round submission.
When Pannie Kianzad and Macy Chiasson face off on the main card of UFC Vegas 88, it will almost 3 years to the day from the last time Chiasson successfully made 135 pounds. We will see how this goes. Since then, she has 3 fights, including one where she actually missed weight, so featherweight plus. At any rate, Pannie Kianzad versus Macy Chiasson in a rematch that nobody really saw coming, but here it is and we have it. Kianzad, the 32-year-old, Swede of Iranian descent fighting out of Denmark, is 16-7 overall. She is 6-4 since joining the UFC as the former Cage Warriors bantamweight champ and the Tough 28 featherweight runner-up. She is coming in off a loss. She fought just once last year. It was at UFC London, where she dropped a unanimous decision to Ketlin Vieira. Prior to that, she had a win over Lena Landsberg all the way back almost 2 full years ago. So she steps back into the cage here, looking to get back in the win column against Chiasson. 32-year-old Louisiana native fighting out of Dallas-Fort Worth is 8-3 overall. She is 6-3 since joining the UFC as the featherweight winner of the 28th season of The Ultimate Fighter, where she, of course, beat Kianzad in their first meeting. She is coming in off a loss as well. Fought all the way back in September of 2022 at UFC 279, falling victim to one of the more impressive / freakish finishes we've seen in a couple of years, where Irene Aldana hit her with an up kick to the liver as Chiasson stood over her, and that was all she wrote. So TKO loss by freakish finish at the freakish UFC 279. She's been off for well over a year. She steps back in here, and despite the long layoff, she is a comfortable favorite. Chiasson is -210, Kianzad +170. All right. You said in between segments here, and I'm just going to quote and repeat you, we're going to talk about this fight, and then it's not going to happen.
What are the betting odds so are the odds, I'm trying to find the best way to say this. Macy Chiasson is like a 2-1 favorite. Would you make the odds greater that this fight doesn't happen? It's pick 'em at least.
I think it's closer to even money, but I'd put it this way. It's around even money that Chiasson misses weight. I would say, I'd say it's slightly in the plus that she misses weight badly enough that the fight is called off. But 139-pound catch weight, not out of the realm of possibility at all. Here's the thing. I personally think Chiasson has wasted too much time and too much of her career trying to make 135 pounds. There are some women that can make 135 pounds comfortably and just haven't buckled down and done it. Chiasson is not one of them. She is huge. I've been face to face with Macy Chiasson a couple of times. She is taller than me, and while she looks drained on the scale when she's cutting to as close to 135 pounds as she can get, she looks like thin as a rail, but in fact she's kind of got broad shoulders. She's got muscles. She's one of the bigger women ever to fight in the UFC. She doesn't cut exactly the same figure as, Megan Anderson or anything. But she's also a much better fighter than Megan Anderson ever was. she is one of the few women in the UFC that was built for fighting at 145 pounds. And less than 2 years ago, she beat Norma Dumont, who is the other woman that really can't comfortably make 135. And Dumont's the one that missed weight. That should have been a title eliminator to fight Chris Cyborg for the 145 pound title. And it just didn't turn into that. Like,
Amanda Nunes, right?
I'm sorry. I said Chris Cyborg. I meant Amanda Nunes.
Yeah. I mean,
anyway,
either way, like,
yeah. Chiasson is also like a good example of a fighter who knows she presents a physical matchup problem and actually uses that. She knows I'm taller than all of my opponents. I have more reach than most of them. I'm stronger than most of them. And she's the ultimate bully. She's tends to be an all the way out or all the way in fighter. Like, she'll either try to keep fighters at range with, a long jab and with some punishing kicks, or if they crash the pocket, she'll get all the way in where she's a bully in the clinch, like nasty knees, just really good at making women wear her weight and just wearing them down, roughing them up with short little shots. I mean, we saw how this went last time. She and Kianzad fought, and while we could clearly tell it was friends fighting, she also kind of dominated. Kianzad, at her best, is a good low power boxer and a kind of scramble heavy grappler. I mean, her really uncomfortable nickname used to be Sexy Scramble, which just sounds like something I wouldn't order at IHOP. But when it went to the ground, Chiasson dominated. She almost tapped her out in the first round. She did tap her out in the second. Just, she took, like, Kianzad wanted to scramble and Chiasson just took her back effortlessly both times. I believe she ran out of time in the first round. Then in the second round, she throttled her. I have the feeling that this is going to be a similar thing. The only real advantage Kianzad has is that she has proven that she can make 135 with no problem. So if Chiasson is severely compromised by the weight cut, maybe all Kianzad has to do is survive the first round. That, I'm not a betting man. We aren't generally a betting show, but that's the thing that would make me nervous about laying money on Chiasson or moving her into a parlay as a greater than 2-1 favorite, is that, you know what? Their first fight was at 145 pounds, which definitely favored Chiasson, and Kianzad still made it to the second round. Here at 135, I could see Chiasson really putting it on her, but it's still a 10-9 round, and Chiasson is sucking wind at the end of it. And I'm this close to talking myself into the upset.
I hate the odds.
Yeah, like that's the problem. I hate the odds. Chiasson hasn't fought in almost a year and a half. It was at 145 pounds, and she got finished with a body shot.
And I think the reason why she got finished by that body shot is because she's cutting weight to 145, and she's freaking huge. Because she was beating Irina Aldana's ass until she got upkicked.
Yep. Like, and I mean, I don't know this. I don't live with her or train with her, but I expect Macy Chiasson walks around like at around 160, 165 pounds, like
maybe more.
You know what? Fuck it, man. Give me Pannie Kianzad. Here's the thing. Chiasson is undeniably tough. Even when she gets tired, it's not like she just quits. I mean, you do have to put her away. Aldana, like, if you get kicked in the liver, it doesn't matter if the spirit indeed is willing. The flesh is too feeble. Like, you die. Raquel Pennington had to actually choke her. Like, Kianzad isn't going to be able to stop her, but I could see Kianzad just stepping on the gas as Chiasson slows down, winning the last 2 rounds of kind of a miserable fight to watch with, cardio kickboxing. But yeah, I just don't have faith in Macy Chiasson at 135 pounds after this much time away. Give me Kianzad by decision in the upset. I mean, all you need to know about Chiasson's toughness is maybe part of her weight problem is that she has the uncuttable weight of bullets in her body. I think she might be the only fighter on UFC roster known to have bullets in her body. So, I mean, that's uncuttable weight right there. She should get an exemption for that. A couple of ounces. Anyway, Kianzad by decision.
You know what's crazy too is why wouldn't, I mean, if they didn't have to make 135 pounds, like why wouldn't Macy Chiasson probably have a close fight with Raquel Pennington tomorrow? You know, like the women's bantamweight is just in a very interesting state right now. Seems like we're going to have a savior next month of the division, maybe. If this person can make 135, you know what? I actually hated women's 145 because I hate a division that doesn't exist. Like you're putting, like they literally made us watch Felicia Spencer versus Amanda Nunes for a title. Like like that just shouldn't have happened in the UFC. But like at this point, just have women's 115, women's 125, women's 145. That way you can at least have fights happen. Just bump all of 135 to 145.
Women's 125 basically becomes the light heavyweight of women. Yep.
And it literally is when you watch them fight too, which is funny. Because this is the equivalent of heavyweight MMA. Just less violent. But Macy Chiasson is, to me, I think she's a much better fighter all around than Pannie Kianzad. But Kianzad has shown the ability to make the weight, has shown the ability to fight a hard fight. Like her fight with Ketlen Vieira in a loss, like people scored that fight for her. It was a close fight. Irana Aldana got a title fight off of beating Macy Chiasson though, with the weird up kick. Really cool finish, but one of those non-replicable. But I hate these fighters that haven't fought in over a year coming in as favorites. Like these, if you haven't fought in a year and you're supposed to be favored like more than 2-1, it should automatically just get real close to pick 'em odds, just because of Chiasson is so good, but just her inability to make weight. She's so unreliable. And then cutting weight, that's probably why she got finished with that body shot, man. Like that's a weird shot. Like getting hit in the liver can shut down anyone, Yeah. But at the same time, like I'm going to pick Macy Chiasson. I hate that I'm going to pick her because I don't think she's going to make the weight. And I think the weight cut to 135, like unless she spent the last year getting her body right to make 135, which I highly doubt. I'd be much more high on her here, but Pannie Kianzad can just, if she makes this fight real ugly, and if there's a third round start to this fight, Kianzad is probably like minus 300 on the live odds. But I'm going to pick Macy Chiasson. I just think she can mug her in the clinch. Like Kianzad likes to be in the clinch. She likes to get those like body lock takedowns. Her game, she wants to try to grapple and be a topside grappler at times, or she's just kind of a low volume, lower power. But I could just see Chiasson just effing her up in the clinch. She's real dirty there. This fight's not going to happen, man. Chiasson by decision.
Third from the top on the UFC Fight Night 239 main card is a light heavyweight matchup between Ovince St. Preux and Kennedy Zechikwu. St. Preux, the 40-year-old Tennessean, is 26-17 overall. He's 14-12 in the UFC. He's 14-10 at light heavyweight. He did have a quick 2-fight jaunt at heavyweight back in 2020, 2021, losing both of those. He lost the last time he fought. It was almost exactly a year ago at UFC Fight Night Andrade versus Blanchfield last February. He got knocked out in under a minute by Felipe Lins. Thought he had made noises about retiring at that point, but he's back 13 months later to face Zechikwu. The 31-year-old Nigerian by way of Dallas-Fort Worth is 12-4 overall. He is 6-4 since joining the UFC as a two-time veteran of Dana White's Contender Series. He won by decision on the very first season back in 2017. Didn't get signed right away. He went back and won a couple more fights in Texas. Appeared on season 2, knocking out Dennis Bryant with a first-round head kick. That was good enough to get him signed. Since then, as I stated, he's 6-4. He did lose his last time out, got knocked out in the first round by Dustin Jacoby last August at UFC on ESPN, Sandhagen versus Font. Prior to that, he had been on a 3-fight win streak and really seemed on the verge of realizing some of his obvious potential. Now needs to bounce back from that setback against Jacoby. He is a prohibitive favorite to do so. Biggest favorite on the card by far. Zechukwu is minus 550. St. Preux plus 380. I get it, man. Weirdness aside, rough last couple of years aside, Ovince St. Preux, whenever he does retire, will probably make it to the MMA Hall of fucking Awesome. Like he shouldn't. The thing, it's not that he's barely above 500 in the UFC. It's that he should never have won a single fight in the UFC. Like,
what's his camp?
It's always been Knoxville MMA, where he's the only fighter of note ever to come out of there, and it shows because he has the weirdest, most idiosyncratic game of any top 10 fighter of the modern era. And by modern era, let's just be generous and say going all the way back to tough, like back to 2005. In the last almost 20 years,
yeah,
he has the weirdest skill set of any guy that spent significant time in the top 10. Because this guy was a top 10 light heavyweight for several years. And describe Ovince St. Preux's offensive skill set. Well, he throws head kicks like some people throw jabs and doesn't actually throw jabs. And he can sometimes effortlessly scoop anybody in the world up for a double leg, but then he'll get guillotined and somehow he tricks people into letting him shoulder choke them. Like it's like you tried, your kid brought you like, a box of Legos that just had like the little odds and ends left. You had to try to build him something out of it. And you like built him the Taj fucking Mahal. It's incredible the amount of success he's had. And there are certain reasons. One, when he wasn't 40 years old, a great athlete. Yeah. And
another sport athlete, not an MMA athlete.
But here's the thing, like, Keith and I have talked about this. Yeah. You can never get an Eric Anders fight without the UFC booth saying that he played linebacker for Alabama. He played for a national championship team. Yes. But in the case of Anders, his athleticism didn't really translate into things that make you a successful middleweight in MMA. OSP is different. And OSP, like, I don't think he was as good a football player. He certainly wasn't on as good of teams, like being on like early aughts Tennessee teams that probably went 5-7, but he's a weight class up and he did get athletic gifts that function well. He is incredibly strong. He's huge. It doesn't show in the tail of the tape, like 6'3", 205. Well, sure. Like lots of light heavyweights are 6'3" and 205. No, like you get near this dude, like his thighs are as big as my waist. His arms are as big as my legs. He's deceptively huge. When he wants to be, he is fast and fluid. Like his striking looks herky jerky because that's how he likes to fight. It's almost like early career John Jones never developed beyond that because, when John Jones debuted in the UFC, like he literally didn't throw a jab. He'd lead with spinning elbows. And he was a great wrestler, but he wouldn't just shoot doubles on people. He used, just more unconventional takedowns. He had a freakish and kind of ill-matched set of skills that worked just because he was so good. And then he gradually developed into like a very good, complete striker, one of the greatest wrestlers in MMA history, like all the things. Like OSP never got past that stage. Maybe it's just he didn't have the same potential. Maybe it is sticking at the same small camp forever. I don't care why. In an era where the sport is becoming increasingly homogenous, you get fewer specialists, you get fewer oddballs. I love that Ovince St. Preux has been around. Yeah, he's not been great recently. And yeah, he's not going to win here. And yeah, it's gonna be ugly, but it doesn't take away from how great he has been. What does he have left at age 40? Not a whole lot. For him to win, he always did best when his opponents gave him an opportunity. Like a guy that has like 4 shoulder chokes, obviously opponents had to make mistakes at some point there. It was only in the last 1 or 2 that he actually developed setups for it. But short of Kennedy Zechukwu making a terrible mistake, which
he does
that in a minute. Exactly. We'll get to that in a minute. But short of that, OSP just doesn't have any hope. Like he at this point, he's not in great shape. So when he does make 205, it's just through sheer force of will. Like you can tell he's just drawn, dehydrated, has no cardio, and he makes up for having no cardio by throwing even less volume than usual. He was always a low volume striker that just wanted to catch people with one huge head kick or one huge uppercut. Now it's just agonizing. It's like every punch costs him money. He was always a good wrestler who underused his wrestling. Now that's gone. I don't know whether he can wrestle anymore. I wouldn't assume he can, just now that he's almost 41. Like really, it's Zechukwu running straight into a huge haymaker, Zechukwu blundering into a guillotine, or like that's about it. Because otherwise, as flawed as he is, this is Kennedy Zechukwu's fight to lose. Kennedy Zechukwu, I can't believe he's over 30 now. It felt like he was going to be 25 or 26 years old forever. He's 31. That's not old at 205 pounds. What he has going for him, he's on the Mount Rushmore of the biggest light heavyweights ever to do it.
Huge.
Like Johnny Walker is number one, tied for number two. Like you've kind of got the batch. Zechukwu and his training partner Ryan Spann. Well, Zechukwu and his training partner Ryan Spann are like 2 and 2B. Rakic could be up there. There's a few of them, but I mean he's 6'5".
He's so big, Kennedy.
He is
like, so and he's big.
And he's got almost an exaggerated John Jones physique. Like his legs are long and a little bit thin, and it allows him to put a deceptive amount of muscle onto his upper body. Like if you look at his Sherdog Fight Finder photo, which is probably right beneath us right now, if I didn't tell you he was 6'5" and 205 pounds, you might make different assumptions. Like he's got the upper body of like
he's huge.
Yeah, he's huge.
He's big.
And he's big. He is and he at least knows to try and use that length. Like he doesn't always succeed. Like he's still mistake prone, but he does try to keep people at bay with a nasty jab. His head kicks are terrifying. He is another guy that can do well all the way in. He is punishing in the clinch.
Look at the Olberg fight.
There you go.
Look at the Olberg
like Carlos Olberg was tuning up Kennedy Zechukwu. Like Olberg, not quite as big, but at least as athletic and just a much more experienced, just a much better kickboxer in terms of technique. He was beating Zechukwu bad, and all it took was Kennedy Zechukwu to catch him with one big shot. Ball started rolling downhill. He's still error prone, but in what Dev, of course, has called, and I always quote it, the lowest fight IQ division in MMA. I mean, he's not the one finding ways to lose to Iwan Kudalaba and Devin Clark, who were two guys that are in that same bucket. He still loses when he faces a demonstrably better fighter. Like Dustin Jacoby is another guy who's very big. Well, it's kind of like the Olberg fight. He's almost as big and is just a better kickboxer.
Crafty. Just so much more crafty.
Like
OSP crafty.
Dustin Jacoby, a guy that like fought Alex Pereira in Glory, is not going to be scared of anything coming his way from Kennedy Zechukwu. No. But Ovince Preux doesn't offer any of that. If they fight all the way out, it'll be Kennedy Zechukwu head kicking Ovince Preux. If they fight all the way in, unless like Zechukwu loses the head position and underhook overhook battle so badly that like St. Preux manages to like guillotine him or something, it'll be like Zechukwu punishing St. Preux. Like it's a bad mismatch, and it's mostly a bad mismatch because St. Preux is so shot. Like he hasn't even looked very inspiring in defeat in, I'm gonna say, like 5 years.
He looked okay against Rothwell, but he was like scared because Rothwell was huge.
Yes, yeah, that's when he decided he didn't like the whole light heavyweight or the whole heavyweight experiment. Yeah.
But he did well, like against, but he's looked like shit since then.
Yeah. I mean, once upon a time, like, dude, he head kicked Cory Anderson. Cory Anderson might be the third best light heavyweight in the world right now.
He knocked him the fuck out.
Yeah. His last fight that was fun to watch was his fight against Tyson Pedro, like almost like 6 years ago. Anyway, I've talked
who just retired.
Yeah. I've talked a long time about a fight that's actually pretty easy to call. Yeah. The only real question is whether OSP has kind of enough fighting spirit, enough physically left in the tank to make it
spirit.
to the enough Modelo. And I'm not sure he does. This may be one of the things where even like as a proud warrior and all those cliches, just the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak, especially if Kennedy starts punishing him to the body in the clinch or hits him with a head kick. And dude, if you're unconscious, it doesn't matter how brave you are. Give me Kennedy's Echukwu by first round finish. And the only question will be whether it's a like TKO where the ref is just pulling him off as he like piles on the punishment, or it's an actual knockout where he just ices him or hits him with a knee to the liver and OSP is done. But I think these things over in the first round.
You know what I was thinking? I'm like, why is OSP in this fight? And I started thinking, and he's probably the highest paid fighter on this whole card. And it may be by a very considerable amount.
Dude, OSP, this is going to be his this is his 27th fight in the UFC. His Venom money is going to be more than almost anybody on the prelims makes.
And he was off of those like old school Joe Silva contracts where like he might be making like $100,000.
No, like, he came out of the Strikeforce acquisition.
Like,
so he came over with people that had contracts that the UFC was grouchy about picking up, and I'm sure it's been renegotiated.
Sure,
you know,
but you never get paid less. You know,
I mean, they may actually have like forced him to take less, but he also stepped in to that interim title fight against John Jones on short notice and kind of saved their bacon. So
he's probably
at any rate, like I would bet I bet he's making six figures. Yeah.
Like he's making $100,000. So like, that's probably why OSP at 40 is taking this fight, because he's getting, I mean, unless your name is Andrei Arlovsky, like you're not going to find an easier fight for, you know, that little money. However, like he should be fighting Andrei Arlovsky at heavyweight. Like that's the kind of fights OSP should be in today. Or like, why isn't he fighting Iwan Kuchilaba? Like Iwan just fought Felipe Lins. Like, why isn't Felipe Lins fighting Kennedy and Echukwu, if I said his name properly? And then why aren't we getting OSP versus Iwan Kuchilaba or like Devin? Like, he shouldn't be fighting someone like this. Is just a setup fight, in my opinion. I think the UFC, you know, likes Kennedy here. I think they know he can be violent. Kennedy is a dude that is known for having defensive lapses. However, you know, he's a well-schooled fighter. Fortis MMA is a good camp. It's definitely a much better camp than wherever OSP is training. Knoxville MMA. It's probably Johnny Knoxville MMA. Like what? Who knows? Kennedy should go out there and just throw a ton of high power volume at OSP and just wash him with a lot of violence. Like, I think that's what this fight will look like. But I also wouldn't be surprised if OSP just like throws one head kick and it hurts him and drops him, just because it's 205, man. Like, that's another reason we're talking about OSP and why he's stuck around with his weird skill light heavyweight. It's just it's the division for weirdness. But Kennedy should probably win this fight by a first round knockout, and it'd probably be violent, especially coming off of that loss against Jacoby. He'll probably want that one back. He's a young dude, and he's got all the tools to, you know, just get better. And OSP's not getting better.
That brings us to the co-main event of UFC Vegas 88, a welterweight matchup between Bryan Battle and Angelosa. Battle, the 29-year-old North Carolina native, is 10-2 overall. He's 5-1 in the UFC since joining as the middleweight winner of the 29th season of The Ultimate Fighter. Despite having joined the UFC as a middleweight, he dropped to welterweight, where he is 3-1 actually, and on a 2-fight win streak. He fought twice last year, knocking out Gabe Green in just 14 seconds in May, then coming back at UFC Fight Night Fiziev versus Gamrot in September and choking out AJ Fletcher in the second round. He will look to make it 3 in a row and continue to cement himself as one of the greater success stories to come out of Tough since the series was brought back a couple of years ago. He'll have to go through Losa to do it. Losa, the 30-year-old Congolese, is 10-3 overall. He's 2-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of season 5 of Dana White's Contender Series. He fought on the Contender Series in 2021, dropped a decision to Jack Della Maddalena, went and won one more fight on in Florida, I believe. Got signed to the UFC, where he is 2-1 with a loss to Munir Lazez, and then wins over AJ Fletcher and Reese McKee. The most recent of those, the McKee fight, was at UFC Paris in September. He'll look to make it 3 in a row. He is not favored to do so. Battle is -170, Losa +140. Dev, I'll toss this to you. These are two, guys that came more or less out of nowhere to win a couple fights in a row in one of the toughest divisions in the UFC. Do you believe in either of them as a future contender? And who do you think wins here on Saturday?
I can pick the winner, but as a contender, welterweight is just so, it's so bottlenecked. And not only is it bottlenecked, like we're just like not dudes like Bilal Muhammad can't get the right fights. And you've got MVP that just came in and just inserted, with guys like MVP just showing up out of nowhere at 36 years old. You got dudes like Wonder Boy at 40 grasping and clasping onto it. Just, I'll be very surprised if either one of these dudes get ranked in their UFC career, but I think Bryan Battle is the most likely to be ranked out of the two. However, the number 15 dude in the division, Rinat Fakhretdinov, kind of kicked his ass. So it's, yeah. Bryan Battle actually has good wins in his very short MMA career. Like, even though it was an exhibition bout, like the Andre Petroski win on the Ultimate Fighter, that ninja choke, I was up a division. Petroski like outweighed him by like 40 pounds, like 40 pounds. Bryan Battle's a dude that's not going to be deterred from a crazy fight. Very good opportunistic BJJ game, and that's kind of what he, made his money on. But all of a sudden, like, he just started knocking fools out, and like not TKOs, attritive, like the head kick of Takashi Sato was like real fucking violent. Yeah, he lost to Rinat Fakhretdinov, but then you put him against a dude that wants to stand like Gabe Green. No one really knocks out Gabe Green. And like just brawl. I don't want to say brawling in the pocket, but like a technical brawl in the pocket, like ices Gabe Green. And then he kind of goes out there and just dog walks AJ Fletcher, who is, AJ Fletcher might be the tiniest welterweight that's ever fought in the UFC outside of like BJ Penn. But AJ Fletcher, I can't think of a smaller welterweight.
Well, shorter.
Yeah,
he does have muscle on him, but yeah,
huge. But like reach wise, like the dude's got like a 60. Like his reach is incredibly small.
No, it just looks like Michael Chandler decided to move up to 170, but didn't get any taller, just got wider. Yep.
Yes. And then Ange Losa, like he comes from a great camp. He's got great training partners. He's been around, like he's around tons of high level dudes. But I still don't really know like what he's good at. Like he wants to strike with people, but he hasn't finished a fight since 2016. All of his fights go to decision, whether he wins or loses. But like a win against Reese McKee in 2023 means absolutely nothing to me. And you're supposed to finish a dude like AJ Fletcher. I think Bryan Battle has shown deficiencies against dudes that are big, heavy, topside grapplers, like in Rinat Fakhretdinov. But even Andre Petroski, like, couldn't bully Bryan Battle. What are the odds again?
Battle's -170, Losa's +140.
I like those odds for Bryan Battle in this fight, honestly. I think he's going to go out there, throw a lot of volume. Angelos he's durable, but he doesn't have a crazy high. He doesn't throw a ton of volume. It's not extremely punishing. And Battle is just a dude that's undeterrable. Give me Bryan Battle to win a decision where the first round's close and he just continues to pull away because he has tons of volume. And I wouldn't be surprised if it looks something like the Petrosky fight where Angelus is getting kind of tagged up on the feet with a lot of volume and decent power, where he, gets a ninja choke, shoots out of desperation to try to switch things up. And now you just fallen into Bryan Battle's best game. And he has one of the coolest / corniest tattoos, Bryan Battle, in the game, where he's got a bunch of tally marks. And he just recently posted on his social media. He's got plenty of tallies, but right now he's at 4. So now he just needs the 5 to cross it over. And I think Angelus is going to be the 5.
I'm with you. I agree that at 170, if you ask me if, fighter X is a future top 10 fighter, I'm picking no almost by default, just because it's so hard to get there. Obviously, Bilal Muhammad is the gold standard right now. He alongside Merab Dvalishvili is the gold standard for winning a million fights in a row and never making
impressively.
But even as far back as 2017, 2018, people like Santiago Ponzinibbio and Vicente Luque were winning 5-6 fights in a row and just not even getting into the top 10 just because it was such a stacked division. And because of that, either of these guys would have to do a whole hell of a lot to do it. But if it's either guy, I do think it's Battle. Dropping the 170 really made things click for him. I mean, that's where the powers come from. He's not that different. It's just his power didn't tell on 185 pounders the way it does on 170 pounders.
And his willingness to just be in a spot to throw with dudes that he's bigger than or are his size.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I really noticed about him at 170, where he's just these dudes aren't bigger than me. They're not going to hurt me. Fuck it. Let's throw down.
Yeah. And that can make for interesting going against Losa, because Losa looks like he should be,
he's huge.
He looks like he should be a knockout machine. If somebody showed you Angelos and said, this guy is the next Joaquin Buckley, you'd be like, that tracks. But he really isn't. He has decent power, but it's not off the charts. You mentioned that the finishes have really dried up once he kind of got to the next level. He's just kind of a medium to low output striker, who can hurt people, but is not putting kill shots on folks. Here, I think Battle actually has better one-shot power. I think he also throws more volume. I think he also has better cardio. And I think he's definitely, if not the better, the more proven ground fighter. Most fights for me, it pits whoever is the more dynamic finisher against whoever has the better durability and cardio. And in this fight, it's Battle for both. So I'm with you. Not a betting show, but I like Battle as a -170 favorite. I think he has a lot of routes to victory here.
That's the best line on this card.
Yeah. Losa could surprise us, but it would be a legitimate surprise because he'd have to do something to Battle that, 1, nobody's done the Battle, and 2, he hasn't done to anybody since fighting on low-level regional promotions. Give me Battle by decision here, and I bet he probably wins all 3 rounds, but kind of wins going away, where it gets more and more pronounced as he pours it on and Losa slows. With that, we come to the main event of UFC Fight Night 239, a heavyweight clash between Tai Tuivasa and Marcin Tybura. Tuivasa, the 30-year-old Australian, is 14-6 overall. He's 8-6 in the UFC. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, having fallen to Cyril Gane, Sergey Pavlovich, and Alexander Volkov in his last 3 fights, stretching back to September of 2022. obviously would like very much to get back into the win column here. To do so, he'll have to get past Tybura. The 38-year-old Pole is 24-8 overall. He's 11-7 in the UFC. He lost his last time out. He was the comeback opponent for Tom Aspinall last July. Aspinall, of course, coming back from that catastrophic knee injury that kept him on the shelf for a year. Faced him in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 224 in London, and was basically the canvas on which Aspinall painted or wrote his comeback story, as Aspinall just ran right through him in 73 seconds. Prior to that, Tybura had been on a 2-fight win streak against Alexander Romanov and Blagoy Ivanov. Odds pretty close, but they do favor the Australian. He's minus 125. Tybura is plus 100 on the comeback. I'll say this much. These two fighters are both known quantities at this point. That is not to say that they have not both improved, because they have, and I'll get to that. Tai Tuivasa, at a glance, you see, okay, well, he's streaky. His UFC run, a 3-fight win streak, a 3-fight losing streak, a 5-fight win streak that actually got him to the edges of the title picture, and then the 3-fight losing streak that he's currently on. When you look past the streaks, it's actually pretty, like, it's the pattern becomes obvious. His win over Derek Lewis is really the only kind of surprising thing. Other than that, he's lost to the good fighters and he's beaten the bad ones. That's kind of how it plays out. He is still what he was, a huge, surprisingly nimble slugger with crushing power in everything. He doesn't throw a whole ton of kicks, and he basically never throws kicks higher than about the lower thigh, but his kicks are hard. They are thudding. He has nasty power in both hands, and as he demonstrated against Lewis, he can put you away with an elbow as well. His problem is literally everything else. For people who can wade through the fire, he does not have good takedown defense. He does not have, defensive grappling wise, he basically has the Derek Lewis, Mark Hunt, like, I'm big and strong and I'm going to bench press you and then get up. If that doesn't work, he doesn't have anything. His gas tank is acceptable. Like, at least over the past couple of years, none of his fights have gone past the second round, and his cardio has certainly not been the reason for any of the losses. Like, he lost because the Gone fight went to the third round, but even there, his cardio wasn't Gone. Yep, he hurt Gone, but his cardio wasn't the reason he lost any of those fights. He lost to better fighters. So that's what Tuivasa is. He's just a better version of what he was when he dropped into the UFC back in 2017. But during his first losing streak, where he lost to Junior Dos Santos, Blagoy Ivanov, and Sergey Spivak, where, just kind of jovial and laughing and likable, and, would just kind of like laugh and dance his way out to the cage and then just look overmatched and not have any plan B and not make any adjustments. I remember being on a preview show with Blaine Henry from the Fight Library and a couple others, and one of us asked, do you think Tai Tuivasa trains? And it wasn't even, do you think he trains jiu-jitsu? Do you think he trains cardio? It was just, do you think Tai Tuivasa trains, full stop? And a couple of us laughed.
Could be asked.
What, like
today?
But that's the thing. I don't think the same thing can be asked today. I think he's evolved some where, I still don't know if he's like putting on the old gi, but he's clearly getting enough, like time and training that he's developing new wrinkles. The stuff he knocked Derek Lewis out with is stuff he could not have done a few years before that. Because
totally,
he went into Lewis's world and put him away, because Derek Lewis is the heavyweight version of what Dustin Poirier has always been incredible at, where he will go toe-to-toe with you fearlessly because he trusts his instincts and reflexes and durability, where I'll slip or roll with your best punch and I'm going to hit you with something that you're not going to be able to come back from. That's that elbow, Dustin man. Poirier's, like Lewis had always been money in those situations. And Tuivasa took a couple of Lewis's best shots and then caught Lewis with an elbow that, that's about as knocked out as Lewis has been. So we know what Tuivasa does. We know how almost exactly how good he is at it. We know what his vulnerabilities are. None of it's changed. It's just been gradual refinement. He is in better physical condition than I mean, he's a 265-pound Polynesian. He's never going to have a six-pack. He's always going to have a keg. But kind of like Mark Hunt and kind of like Justin Tafa, who's a literal Mark Hunt disciple, that doesn't mean that he's not actually nimble on his feet and doesn't have decent cardio.
Sure.
He's
got 3 kegs because each of his freaking thighs look like kegs too. He's huge.
He is.
He can hurt anyone. He can knock out anyone.
He can. Tybura, similar story. Like, he's been in the UFC forever, and he's the same guy he's always been. Just he's tightened up some of the deficiencies and gotten a little better at the strengths. He's always been a huge guy. Like, always been 6'3". He'll sometimes weigh in a little lighter, sometimes a little heavier, but on average weighs in around 255 pounds. I used to joke that he doesn't have good power. And for a guy as huge as he is, like, not to have better power than he does, like, he was Chase Sherman long before Chase Sherman was Chase Sherman. I used to joke that, like, they must not even, like, let him back into Poland after his fights, because Poland's MMA scene is otherwise so fucking violent. Like, KSW is like a slaughterhouse. Like, I bet, like, Tybura's in the UFC because, like, KSW exiled him. But he sits down on his punches a little better. He's still not Anthony Rumble Johnson or, like, Francis Ngannou, but he sits down on his punches, and they definitely hurt. He's, for a guy that's not terribly fast or athletic, he's a good wrestler. Yeah. He's a very heavy topside grappler. Like, if he's on top of you, most heavyweights are in trouble. Like, you're at least getting rode out for that round.
Getting tired quick.
If you're getting tired quick, and if you don't offer anything back at him, I mean, he is going to just punch you, take your back, and try to choke you. He has always been susceptible to really hard hitters and people who are much more athletic than him. But there aren't many of those at heavyweight, which is why he has a pretty good record. I mean, he's won something like 8 of his last 10. Yeah, Tom Aspinall blew through him. That's what he's going to do.
He's the freaking best heavyweight on the planet.
Alexander Volkov, like, kept him on the outside and frustrated him for 15 minutes. That's what Volkov's going to do.
Yeah.
But aside from that, he's beaten the bad, the mediocre, and the pretty good. This is a 2 true outcomes fight. Either Tuivasa finds Tybura's chin probably sometime in the first 2 rounds and hits him hard enough that Tybura can't recover. Like, normally Tybura's got a good chin, recovers well. Or Tybura finds out, I can take Tuivasa down, and if he does, I think Tuivasa's in trouble. And that dynamic kind of swings as we go further into the fight. The further we go into the fight, the easier it's going to be for Tybura to take Tuivasa down. The harder it's going to be for Tuivasa to catch Tybura with a huge punch. I'm not either of these guys' coach, but I would love to see Tuivasa lean on his leg kicks. When he uses them, he has some of the best low kicks. Like, they sound horrifying. And more importantly, you can tell that the other guy feels them. For a guy in Tybura that's at some point going to try to take Tuivasa down, starting to chew up his lead leg is going to give him something to think about. I don't know if Tuivasa has it in him to engage in that kind of planning, but considering that he has to know his back against the wall here, like, the UFC might not cut him on 4 straight losses. It's rare for the UFC to find a fighter with his kind of natural charisma and star power. But if he loses 4 in a row,
Australia.
Yeah. If he loses 4 in a row, he's at least done headlining shit.
Yeah.
Like, he's closing out the prelims of a pay-per-view card. So he's got to know that, I say he fights a smart fight here. Tybura is 38. That's not old at heavyweight, but he's got a lot of miles on him. He has taken a lot of punishment over the years. He was never the fastest guy, and he's even slower now. I'm going to say Tuivasa kind of looks spry and bouncy, is able to get in range on the taller, rangier guy, finds his chin early and often, and it's not quite as overwhelming or one-sided as the Aspinall fight looks, but Tybura just doesn't have time to recover or offer much back on the way to losing via first round knockout to Tuivasa. So expect, I don't know if it's going to be you and me or Keith and me, but I'm probably going to be drinking some beer out of a shoe sometime early Sunday morning. Tuivasa, first round KO.
You know, with this fight, man, number one, I feel like this should just be like Tuivasa versus like Austin Lane. Because who cares? Like, just give Tuivasa someone that he's just gonna go fucking ice, because that's what Tuivasa's for. Tuivasa's not for a title. He knows it. We know it. The UFC knows it. I don't know what they were doing trying to. The Ciryl Gane fight made sense because Ciryl Gane had come off some really shitty, boring fights, like the Jairzinho Rosenstrike fight. But like, even Jairzinho Rosen, like, why isn't this? And I was just talking about this with a previous fight, but like, why isn't this Jairzinho Rosenstrike versus Tai Tuivasa? And why didn't we have Gaziev versus Tybura?
I mean,
like, why isn't that happening?
Tai Tuivasa made it all the way to a heavyweight title eliminator, man.
I know.
He won 5 in a row. He fought Ciryl Gane. He lost to Gane, and then his next fight, Gane fought John freaking Jones for the interim heavyweight title. Can you imagine if Tuivasa had managed to finish Gane? Like, when he caught him, he managed to finish him. Can you imagine Tai Tuivasa? Would they have made Tuivasa versus Jones? I don't know. But Ngannou, was that close.
We might have gotten Ngannou versus Tuivasa, which would have been hilariously awesome. You know, this could look just like the Sergey Spivak fight for Tuivasa. And I mean, unless Tybura is an absolute fool, that's the fight he wants to have with Tuivasa here. Because I don't care if you are Tom Aspinall or Sergey Pavlovich or Ciryl Gane. Yeah, those dudes, 2 of those dudes beat Tuivasa and finished him. But fighting Tuivasa in that style is a literal roll of the dice every single time. Ask Ciryl Gane what it's like to get hit by him. Tuivasa can knock out any heavyweight on the planet. He's huge. He absolutely cracks, and he is fearless. I mean, his fight with Ciryl Gane, he got hit with and this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Number one, Tuivasa's taken some damage, especially like Gane's notorious back of the heads shots damage, where he's a technical fighter until he has you hurt, and then he looks like he's fighting a horde of bees. You know exactly, like, he is technical up until the point, and then he's just hammer fisting you in the back of the head. That's Ciryl Gane. But Tuivasa, he's got the type of kicks at heavyweight. Number one, he may be like the best leg kicker at heavyweight. And all of Poland's power was fueled into Jan Blachowicz. Like, you know, so Tybura is, I could totally see Tybura trying to snatch a low single and just tipping Tuivasa over, because that's how you take down Tuivasa. But at the same time, I could totally see, you cannot check a Tuivasa leg kick. Like, he's so big and he kicks so hard. Talking about Jan Blachowicz, he might be the only dude that's willing to check a Tuivasa leg kick. Tuivasa's smart, lands, 6 to 8 leg kicks, and then lets his hands go. All it takes is one exchange with him. Like, he could fucking murk anybody. He hits so hard, but he is just so porous. He's so good in one place, but he is just so porous everywhere else. But I still think he's going to win this by knockout. Tybura just got hurt really bad by Aspinall, and Aspinall is much more of a tactician than Tuivasa. But Tuivasa can be just as fucking violent as Tom Aspinall. Tuivasa can be just as violent as any human on the planet. Give me Tuivasa by knockout, first round. Kicks his legs a bunch, causes Tybura to overextend after getting his legs beat up, and then just crushes him with something.
All right, so we are in agreement. And that is it. The Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 239, Tuivasa versus Tybura. I've been Ben. He has been our special guest, Dev. If this is your first time watching or listening to one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. We do our best to bring a mix of actual in-depth analysis and occasional humorous asides. Please do like, subscribe, drop us a comment. My normal co-host Keith and I both man the comment section. We'd love to hear your take on these fights, but join us for the recap. Probably Keith and I will be live on the Sherdog YouTube page right after the main event. We will talk about all 13 of these fights, going from the headliner all the way down to that interesting bantamweight opener, talking about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something. Talking about what's next for some of the notable winners as well as losers, and talking with you because the live chat is open that whole time. So we are taking your questions, your comments, and your hot takes in real time. We have a growing community of friends that hang out with us after the fights. We'd love for you to be part of it. Between now and then, thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy these fights.
To the sea. Make your bed of fairy tales while you're hunting